Chapter 2662. Not only did Marshal Meng He answer Su Ping's question truthfully, but he also told Su Ping about the three major star zones they had passed through. Green Sun Star Zone, Black Dragon Star Zone and Fan Gang Star Zone. The vastness of these three star areas wasn't less than Zishao Star Area. Each star zone had hundreds of macro worlds and tens of millions of stars. There were also many dangerous and forbidden lands as well as a resplendent galaxy. After Marshal Meng He answered, Ji Tianqing asked his second question. Other than the great Emperor Tian Fa, who are the other true gods in the Heaven Punisher tribe? Where are they now? Marshal Meng He thought for a while before answering, there are at least hundreds of true gods. I can't say for sure. However, among the hundreds of true gods, there are 7 outstanding ones who are the leaders of our tribe. The strongest person below the great emperor is the great emperor's son, Tian Shu. Tian Shu has been valued by the god since he was young. He was taken in as his last disciple and taught him divine powers. He is known as the world's top genius. He has the 7-star brilliant sun divine body and reached level 9 true god realm in just 300 years. His strength is second only to the great emperor. He has terrifying combat strength and supreme divine skills. He is known as the astral war god. When Ji Tianqing heard this, he raised his eyebrows and showed an interested expression. Prince Tian Shu, the 7-star brilliant sun divine body, was taken in as the last disciple of the upper realms god? He was taught by the god and was named the astral war god? Interesting. Marshal Meng He didn't respond. He didn't want to talk about this. In his mind, Ji Tianqing's strength and status couldn't be compared to the great Emperor Tian Fa and Tian Shu. However, he was going to die. There was no point in talking about it. After a moment of silence he continued, other than Prince Tian Shu, the third strongest person in our tribe is the Empress, Zhou Xian. The Empress lives in seclusion in the palace and rarely shows herself. She is the most mysterious. It is said that the Empress doesn't have the blood of our tribe. She is the reincarnation of a god from the upper realm and was born in the water spirit tribe. 800 years ago, when the great emperor was conquering the universe, he met the saintess of the water spirit tribe, Zhou Xian. He was stunned by her beauty and shocking talent. Therefore the great emperor kidnapped her and brought her to planet Heaven Punisher. After 100 years of persuasion he finally won her heart. 300 years ago, Zhou Xian had given birth to her son, Tian Shu, and had never shown her face again. Marshal Zhenan had once mentioned that Zhou Xian was a mighty figure from the upper realm. The reason why she had yet to ascend was because she wants to borrow an ancient divine ability to defy the heavens and change her fate. In this life she has a chance of breaking through to the realm of supreme divine kings. When he said this, Great General Meng He's eyes were filled with admiration and yearning. Even though Ji Tianqing's heart was as calm as water, he could not help but frown. He thought to himself, Zhou Xian? There are tens of thousands of godly sovereigns in the upper realm, but I have never heard of this name. This person must have obtained some great fortuitous encounter. Not only was he able to reincarnate, he was even able to change his fate and charge into the God King realm. This is a huge disaster. If we don't get rid of it, I'm afraid there will be future disasters. At this moment, Marshal Meng He continued, the 4th strongest person in our clan is the highly respected imperial tutor. Not only was he the great emperor's right-hand man and military advisor, but he was also the spiritual leader of our hundreds of millions of people. It was his series of reforms and actions that allowed our clan to rapidly expand and multiply, giving us the ability to unify the upper realm. Before Marshal Meng He could finish, Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said, there's no need to mention the imperial tutor. I've already killed him. Marshal Meng He was instantly speechless. He raised his head in shock and looked at Ji Tianqing in horror. After a while he calmed down and said in a low voice, under the imperial tutor are the 4 marshals. They were the East Conquering Marshal, West Conquering Marshal, North Conquering Marshal and Protector Marshal. The strength of these 4 marshals is similar. The Kingdom Protector Marshal is stronger, having reached the 6th level of the True God Realm many years ago. The other 3 marshals are also at the 6th level of the True God Realm. Their actual combat strength seems to be slightly stronger than the Southern Marshal. After listening, Ji Tianqing nodded and said, after the death of the Southern Marshal, there are still 4 marshals under the Heaven Punisher Emperor. The Heaven Punisher tribe is really full of talents and powerhouses. Marshal Meng He felt a strong sense of pride. He smiled and said, Of course. Our clan has always been the most talented clan in the 3,000 worlds. If not, how could our clan be protected by the upper realms god? Our clan has received God's grace and bathed in the divine light. Of course, we're like a tiger that has grown wings and a dragon that soars to the heavens. Ji Tianxing, although you're very powerful, I still have to give you a piece of advice. If you go against our clan, you'll definitely die. If you're smart enough, you should find the right time to reconcile with our emperor. Our emperor is thirsty for talents. As long as you work for our clan, the emperor will definitely nurture you. Ji Tianxing smiled coldly and interrupted him. He said in a mocking tone, "Many years ago, before the Heaven Punisher Emperor fought with me, he said the same thing. Not only did he want to make me a marshal, but he also wanted to help me break through the Heaven God realm and ascend to the upper realm. However, I rejected him and gave him a good beating. I almost killed him." Marshal Meng, he was speechless again. His face stiffened and his heart twitched. In the face of a mysterious and arrogant person like Ji Tianxing, he felt that any words he said were pale and laughable. Ji Tianxing thought for a while and asked a third question. How many people are there in the Heaven Punisher tribe? The black-armored warriors who followed the fleet were all at the martial sage realm. I'm very curious. How many martial sages are there in the Heaven Punisher tribe? How did they nurture so many of them? Marshal Meng, he smiled and said, "The imperial tutor racked his brains for 800 years to solve the problem of our clan's reproduction. 1,000 years ago there were only 8 billion people in our clan. Now there are more than 30 billion of them. A mere Heaven Punisher planet does not have enough resources to support more than 30 billion people. Thus, we have no choice but to conquer more territories and plunder more resources." Hearing this, Bai Long, who was standing beside Ji Tianxing, could not help but interject. F***ck. If that's the case, the Heaven Punisher tribe has no choice and has no choice? The most damnable one is the imperial tutor. He caused us to reproduce like rats and bring disaster to the 3,000 realms. Marshal Meng, he glanced at Bai Long and did not reply. Instead he continued, "As for the number of martial sages, there are at least 100 million of them. After all, our clan has the protection of God's grace. Nothing is impossible. Any adult martial artist who has reached the cross-calamity realm can head to the heaven worship altar in each country to receive the God's blessing. After the God's blessing, they can directly break through to the martial sage realm. After cultivating for a few years and stabilizing their cultivation, they can join the fleet and conquer the galaxy." Bai Long's eyes widened and he exclaimed in disbelief, "Are you sure? They have just reached the cross-calamity realm, and after the God's blessing, they can directly break through to the martial sage realm? Don't they need to go through the 9 tribulations? What is that God's blessing? How can it help them avoid the 9 tribulations?" Chapter 2663. Bai Long was not the only one who was shocked. Ji Tianxing also frowned and his expression became extremely solemn. Even Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang had realized where the problem lay, and they were deeply shocked. Ji Tianxing did not speak, but many thoughts appeared in his mind. The 3,000 worlds and the 10,000 races are all restricted by the rules of heaven. Regardless of whether it is a martial artist, a flower, a tree, a bird or a beast, all living things have to go through 9 tribulations to become a god. This is the rules of heaven and no one or god can change it. The heaven-worshipping altar of the Heaven Punisher tribe can prevent one from going through 9 tribulations and break through to the martial sage realm? How is this possible? Even if I had the power of a peak supreme being in my previous life, I could not control the rules of heaven. Who is the god behind the Heaven Punisher tribe? How can he control the tribulations and change the rules of heaven? Thinking of this, Ji Tianxing's heart felt heavy. He felt an inexplicable pressure. At the same time, his heart was filled with doubts and he wanted to go to the Heaven Punisher tribe immediately to unravel the secrets of the heaven-worshipping altar. When Ji Tianxing collected his thoughts, he glanced at Bai Long beside him. Bai Long kept his thoughtful expression and looked at Su Mo. He shook his head and sighed. "Master, it is scary to think about it. We still have a long way to go and it will be more dangerous than we expected." Ji Tianxing knew this and he nodded. "We will deal with whatever comes our way. In my previous life I could not take the last step. In this life no one can stop me." Bai Long nodded and his eyes were filled with anticipation and desire. Marshal Meng, he looked at Ji Tianxing in a daze. Besides respect, he was also curious and doubtful. Although he did not understand Ji Tianxing's words, He was sure that Ji Tianxing's identity was not simple. Ji Tianxing then asked Marshal Meng He a few more questions. They were all related to the Heaven Punisher tribe, but they were not as important as the first 3 questions. After Marshal Meng He answered all the questions, Ji Tianxing nodded in satisfaction. Meng He, you did well. Now I will fulfill my promise and give you an honorable death. Kill yourself. When Marshal Meng He heard the words end his own life, he did not feel despair or pain. Instead, he looked as if he had been relieved of a heavy burden. In fact, there was even a hint of delight and a sneer of success in the depths of his eyes. Ji Tianxing, you are indeed a gentleman. See you again. See you again? White Dragon frowned with a strange expression. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, looked indifferent. The corner of his mouth curled up into a smile, as if he didn't realize there was a problem. At this time, Great General Meng He raised his palms and circulated his god force, shattering Huang Xiaolong's body. Boom! His body, which was riddled with holes, crumbled into dust on the spot and ignited with purple flames that soared into the sky. Intense purple flames rushed into the sky. An invisible force was using the purple flames as a cover to escape. Obviously, Marshal Meng He had left a backup plan. However, just as that formless energy was about to escape from the heaven-punishing divine palace, Ji Tianxing, who was standing still, suddenly raised his left hand and made a grabbing motion toward the sky. Swoosh! The boundless power of the realm immediately formed a giant palm high in the sky and caught that formless energy. In the next instant, the giant palm that held the formless energy landed on the square. The giant palm shrunk tens of thousands of times and became a ball of golden light the size of a fist. It floated in front of Ji Tianxing. That formless energy was sealed in the golden light and could not escape. After struggling violently for a while, it finally fell into despair and formed a transparent face. It was Marshal Meng He's face. However, it was only half the size of a palm. It glared at Ji Tianxing with resentment and cursed in a weak voice, Ji Tianxing, you untrustworthy bastard, you despicable beast. Seeing this scene, White Dragon, Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang all had a look of realization. Ji Wushuang muttered angrily, no wonder this fellow was so tactful and surrendered so easily. He even answered all of Father's questions. It turns out that he wanted to lower Father's guard and use a secret technique to escape. Ji Wuhan nodded in agreement and said solemnly, the Heaven Punishers are not only brave, cruel and domineering but also very cunning. Using this opportunity, White Dragon hurriedly cleared his name. He pointed at the ball of light and said, Junior brother, junior sister, you too saw it with your own eyes, right? The Heaven Punishers are cruel, vicious and cunning. Therefore we cannot be merciful to the Heaven Punishers and we cannot let our guard down. Being merciful to them is being cruel to ourselves. Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang were silently agreeing with White Dragon's words. At this moment, Ji Tianxing looked at the golden ball of light with a smile and said to Marshal Meng He, from the moment you begged for mercy without any backbone, I guessed that you would do this. However, you were too naive. Since I promised to give you a dignified death, I definitely won't let you live. Until we meet again. After saying that, Ji Tianxing reached out and grabbed the golden ball of light. A brilliant golden divine flame burned in his palm. Swoosh! The entire golden ball of light burned and quickly burned Marshal Meng He into nothingness. When the divine flame dissipated, Ji Tianxing withdrew his hand and ordered White Dragon, let Colored Glaze and Lan Kuan guard the divine palace. You take Qian Yu and Black Dragon to kill the remaining Heaven Punishers and empty the treasury. White Dragon happily acknowledged the order and immediately went to carry out the mission. There were still hundreds of Heaven Punishers hiding in the Heaven Punishing Divine Palace. White Dragon, Qian Yu and Black Dragon searched the Divine Palace and quickly found the remaining Heaven Punishers and killed them all. Then they tried to break into the treasury one by one and took all the divine tier resources and treasures into their spatial rings. One day later, the 2 treasuries were emptied. White Dragon left the Heaven Punishing Divine Palace and sent the resources and treasures back to the 5 Elements world, placing them in the Divine Tower. The 4 divine beasts guarded the Heaven Punishing Divine Palace and silently waited for the next battle. Ji Tianxing took out 19 heavenly battle puppets from his spatial ring and threw them on the plaza. Qinchin Yaya, you did not have the chance to participate in the previous battle. So Father left these heavenly battle puppets for you to practice. These heavenly battle puppets are not afraid of death and have extraordinary combat strength. They will definitely be able to temper your combat skills and experience. Take this opportunity to practice well. After saying that, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and undid the chains on the puppets. The puppets immediately regained their freedom. They stared at Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang with scarlet eyes and immediately surrounded them. Although they had been injured by Ji Tianxing and their combat strength had been reduced by half, they were still fierce and ferocious. There were as many as 19 of them and they were still able to put a lot of pressure on Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang. The siblings did not dare to be careless. They gripped their divine swords tightly and cautiously defended and counterattacked. An exciting battle of trials unfolded in the square. Ji Tianxing stood at the peak of the divine palace and watched the battle while giving pointers to the two children. It was quite effective. Hurry up and read it. Chapter 2664. The battle lasted for an hour before it ended. Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang had killed the 19 heaven battle puppets. The two siblings had only suffered some superficial wounds and were fine. Although their strength was similar to the heaven battle puppets, they knew many secret techniques. Their teamwork was perfect, and they could unleash a battle prowess comparable to a true god's. The 19 heaven battle puppets had already been injured by Ji Tianxing, and they only had half of their battle prowess left. Even when they joined forces to deal with Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang, the two siblings managed to turn the situation around and defeat them one by one. After this trial battle, the two siblings' teamwork was even better. They also had more battle experience and their control of divine techniques was even more perfect. After this matter ended, everyone stayed in the heaven-punishing divine palace and waited patiently. Soon 3 days had passed. The captains guarding the 5 continents led their fleets and rushed back to the heaven-punishing divine palace to rescue Marshal Meng He. However, when they arrived at the heaven-punishing divine palace, they realized that the situation was not good. The entire heaven-punishing divine palace was surrounded by a dark purple barrier of divine light. It was very quiet inside and outside the heaven-punishing divine palace. There were no sounds of fighting and there were no heaven-punishing divine guards walking around. Many captains were full of doubts and vigilance as they crossed the barrier of divine light and entered the heaven-punishing divine palace. The moment they stepped into the heaven-punishing divine palace, disaster befell them. The overwhelming light of divine spells fell from the sky like a flood, drowning the captains and their fleets. In an instant, many battleships were turned into scrap metal, and many captains were severely injured and on the verge of death. As for the black-armored guards hiding in the battleships, they suffered even more casualties. A one-sided massacre began. Ji Tianxing sat at the top of the heaven-punishing divine palace and did not need to do anything. Bai Long led Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang, and the 4 divine beasts to slaughter the heaven-punishing fleet. The battle did not last long and it ended quickly. After the battle, the heaven-punishing fleet suffered heavy casualties and was completely wiped out. Bai Long, Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang, and the others were unscathed. Such a huge contrast and such a shocking result caused everyone to feel excited. In the next 3 days, more and more fleets returned. Most of the captains let down their guard when they saw that the divine palace was still there and that the purple light shield was safe and sound. They mistakenly thought that the divine palace was unharmed and that Marshal Meng He had stopped the invaders. Therefore, they did not have much vigilance and stepped into the purple light barrier. However, they soon regretted it. What greeted them was, of course, slaughter and death. Even if there were a few captains who were paranoid and vigilant, they would still be on guard. They wandered around the vicinity of the divine palace and did not dare to enter the range of the divine palace. Even so, it was useless. Whenever they encountered such a situation, the white dragon would lead the 4 mythological beasts to attack and destroy the battleships. Within these 3 days, there were over 100 battles that took place here and there. Ji Tianxing basically did not make a move. After all, there wasn't a single expert who was qualified enough for him to personally deal with. Bai Long, Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang, and the 4 divine beasts could all be easily dealt with. After 3 days of fighting, more than 80% of the heaven-slicing fleet guarding Xixiao Star had been slaughtered. Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang's performance in the battle was the most heroic and outstanding. After a series of battles, they had greatly honed their battle experience and their strength and foundation of the divine path had become more stable. They had gained a lot. After 3 days, everything was over. No fleet rushed back to the divine palace, and the heaven-slicing experts and guards left behind on the 5 continents could not cause any trouble. Therefore Ji Tianxing destroyed the heaven-slicing divine palace. He rushed to the entrance of the Purple Heaven Cave alone to check on the sealing formation there. The white dragon led Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang, and the 4 divine beasts to the various continents to clean up the survivors of the heaven-slicing divine palace. Thus, another month's time was delayed. After a month, the remaining heaven-slicing experts on the various continents were basically wiped out. Only a few heaven-slicing experts escaped, but they could only run for their lives and could not cause any trouble. After Ji Tianxing arrived at the entrance of the Purple Heaven Cave, he carefully inspected it. He found that the maze formation had been broken, but the sealing formation was still intact. The facts proved that the heaven-slicing Great Emperor had searched for the Purple Heaven Cave after occupying the Purple Heaven planet. However, after the heaven-slicing Great Emperor had found the entrance to the Purple Heaven Cave, he had spent a lot of effort to break the maze formation, but he could not do anything about the sealing formation. This was exactly what Ji Tianxing had expected. When he had set up the formation, it was to prevent the heaven-slicing Great Emperor from making a comeback. Therefore he had set up 2 heaven god-level formations. The fact that the heaven-slicing Great Emperor could break 1 heaven god-level maze formation was already impressive. Ji Tianxing strolled around the Purple Heaven Cave and meditated for half a month before leaving. After a month, the situation on the Purple Heaven planet was settled. The heaven-slicing experts had all been killed, and the 5 continents had returned to peace. Billions of people had regained their freedom. Ji Tianxing's deeds once again spread across the 5 continents and were praised by countless people. The great emperors of many divine nations also jointly requested Ji Tianxing to be the Star Lord to protect the Purple Heaven planet and the entire star zone. This time Ji Tianxing still did not agree. In the past, the 5 elemental world was in the Purple Heaven star zone. If the Purple Heaven star zone was invaded, the 5 elemental world would not be spared either. The 2 sides shared prosperity and loss, and their fates were linked. However, it was different now. He could control the 5 elemental world and travel through the void and the various star zones. He did not know when he would be able to return from the Purple Heaven star zone. Even if he became the Star Lord of the Purple Heaven planet, it would be meaningless. If that was the case, it would be better to leave the position of Star Lord empty and leave it to a powerful and determined expert to protect the Purple Heaven planet. 2 months later, Ji Tianxing had finished dealing with the trivial matters on the Purple Heaven planet. Therefore he left the Purple Heaven planet with the White Dragon, Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang, and the 4 divine beasts. They steered the battleship across the void and returned to the 5 elemental world. Then Ji Tianxing controlled the 5 elemental world and continued to travel through the void toward the heaven-punishing star zone. From the Purple Heaven planet to the heaven-punishing star zone, they would have to pass through 3 star zones. The journey was long and filled with dangers. Who knew how long it would take for them to reach their destination? Therefore Ji Tianxing was not in a hurry. He cultivated as he traveled through the void. He would observe the mortal worlds he encountered along the way and search for traces of the heaven-punishing race. If a world was occupied by the heaven-punishing race, he would help destroy the heaven-punishing fleet and save the cultivators and people of that world. As a result, his speed was even slower. After 5 years, the 5 elemental world finally flew out of the Purple Heaven star zone and entered the Azure Sun star zone. At the same time, more than 80% of the heaven-punishing fleet in the Purple Heaven star zone had been destroyed. The Southern Expedition fleet only existed in name, and the few survivors could no longer cause any trouble. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2665. Before Great General Meng he was defeated, he had honestly explained the situation of the 3 major star zones. Ji Tianxing had long known that the Green Sun star zone had been conquered by the Heaven Punishers more than 30 years ago. 90% of the 100 worlds in the huge star zone had fallen under the control of the Heaven Punishers fleet. The East Conquering Fleet was now in charge of the Green Sun star zone. According to Great General Meng He, the East Conquering Fleet was slightly stronger than the South Conquering Fleet. The generals and captains under his command were all elite soldiers. Most importantly, the East Conquering Fleet's invasion of the Green Sun star zone was smoother. It was unlike when the South Conquering Fleet attacked the Purple Cloud star zone, where they had spent so much time and sacrificed so many Heaven Punishers. After the East Conquering Fleet unified the Green Sun star zone, They still had more than 5,000 battleships and 500,000 elite soldiers left. The situation in the Green Sun Star Zone had been very stable for more than 30 years. Even though the cultivators of the various worlds would resist, they were scattered and could not achieve much. Soon they were suppressed by the Heaven Punishers. After so many years of operation, the Heaven Punishers' rule had been consolidated. After recuperating, their forces had become even stronger. Ji Tianxing had long been mentally prepared. The East conquering fleet's strength and foundation were definitely stronger than the South conquering fleets. He would definitely face many years of fierce battles in the Green Sun Star Zone this time. 3 days later, the Five Elements world flew to the border of the Green Sun Star Zone. In the dark void ahead, a silver river of stars that stretched from north to south and was billions of miles long appeared. Even though it was still a few 100 million miles away, the Five Elements world was bathed in a cold silver glow. The ancient, majestic, and mysterious aura that rushed toward them made everyone gasp in amazement. The galaxy that hung in the void like a jade belt was the border of the Green Sun Star Zone. One could only enter the Green Sun Star Zone after crossing that huge galaxy. Looking from afar, there were tens of thousands of stars in the galaxy, shining brightly and dazzlingly. No one knew how many tens of thousands of years this beautiful scene had lasted in the void. Ji Tianxing, Bai Long, and the others stood on the golden barrier of the Five Elements world, admiring the galaxy in front of them. Bai Long exclaimed, "1,000 years have passed in the blink of an eye. We can finally see the galaxy and the universe again." His expression was somewhat emotional as many memories surfaced in his mind. He recalled the past when he followed Kenshin and traveled through the void. Ji Tianxing gazed at the Milky Way and said in a calm tone, "The world has changed. Things remain the same, but people have changed. Only the Milky Way remains forever, as splendid as ever." The heavenly Tao was fortunate enough to allow all the races in the world to gain intelligence. Through the cultivation of martial arts and the divine Tao, they could also be as brilliant as the stars. However, the sad thing is that no matter how much we gods cultivate too, we can't escape the cycle of reincarnation and death. Even a peak divine king's lifespan also cannot be mentioned in the same breath as an ordinary star. It was true that even an ordinary star in the galaxy had a lifespan of tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of years. The lifespan of the King of Pantheon was less than 1% of the lifespan of a star. Hearing this, not only did Bai Long's eyes dim, even Ji Wuhan fell silent. Only Ji Wushuang revealed a thoughtful expression as she asked Ji Tianxing, "Father, could it be that the Divine King realm is the end of the Divine Tao?" Ji Tianxing turned his head to look at her and shook his head with a smile. He said, "For the vast majority of people, yes. However, for those who had once reached the Divine King realm, that is not the case." Ji Wushuang's eyes became bright as she asked longingly, "Father, Mother said that you were once one of the strongest divine kings in the world. Then do you know what realm is above the Divine King realm?" Ji Tianxing shook his head again and said, "This question was also something that Father painstakingly searched for and explored back then. Fortunately, Father has already touched the threshold of that realm. That realm has already transcended the shackles of the mortal world and jumped out of the cycle of reincarnation. It has remarkable abilities, can do as one pleases, and is immortal." "Immortal?" Ji Wushuang murmured, vaguely understanding something. At this time, Bai Long warned everyone, "In a month we will be approaching that Milky Way. The Five Elements world is too big, we cannot pass through that Milky Way. Otherwise we will collide with countless stars. It is very dangerous. We can only go around that Milky Way and enter the Azure Sun Galaxy. Even so, everyone still has to remember. In the future, if you are piloting a warship or flying in the void, you must be careful of this Milky Way. The Milky Way looks magnificent, but it is actually very dangerous and unpredictable. There are many unexpected dangers. Even true gods and heavenly gods will lose their lives if they are not careful." Qian Yu came over and asked curiously, "Old Bai, what dangers can there be in the Milky Way? Could it be that there are some ferocious beasts and divine beasts in the Milky Way?" Bai Long glanced at it and said with a smile, "If it is only ferocious beasts and divine beasts, then it is easy to kill and eat. The dangers in the Milky Way are mostly void storms, void flames, star tides, folded spaces, and black holes. Void storms and void flames are easy to deal with, you all have encountered them a few years ago. The star tide rarely appeared, but its power was extremely terrifying, and its danger was unpredictable. hundreds of thousands of stars at a specific time, release a terrifying star shockwave at the same time, which is enough to destroy hundreds or thousands of stars. The most troublesome is the folded space. On the surface there is no clue, but in reality, it is very difficult to come out after entering. It is very likely that one will be trapped inside and die. And the most terrifying is the legendary black hole. That thing is mysterious and unpredictable. Once you encounter it, you can only avoid it in advance. No one dares to go near it. Not to mention Divine King experts, even thousands or tens of thousands of stars will be destroyed once they are swallowed by the black hole. Bai Long explained the dangers in the void to everyone and taught them how to deal with it. His eloquence flowed like a river and flowed endlessly. Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang, and the divine beasts listened attentively, silently memorizing his words. A month passed quickly. The huge five elements world was close to the resplendent Milky Way. Under Ji Tianxing's precise control, the five elements world flew close to the edge of the Milky Way and took a detour. Even so, there was still an accident during the detour. In the resplendent Milky Way, more than a dozen dazzling shooting stars actually flew out and blasted toward the five elements world. At first glance, it was as if there was an unparalleled expert in the Milky Way, using the stars as hidden weapons to shoot at the five elements world. This made Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang, and the divine beasts all vigilant. However, Bai Long hurriedly explained to everyone that it was because the five elements world was too big. When it approached the Milky Way, it produced gravitational forces and shock waves. Some stars with extremely high metal content would be attracted and fly over like shooting stars. If it was hit by a shooting star, the five elements world would definitely be damaged and there would be a huge shock. Super waves would surge in the sky sea and several continents would also shatter. Billions of living beings would definitely suffer. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing had long anticipated and taken precautions. When more than a dozen shooting stars attacked one after another, he not only controlled the five elements world to dodge, but he also released vast and mighty power of the world to catch a shooting star. Chapter 2666. That meteor was not big, only 1/10 the size of the five elements world. Even so, Ji Tianxing had to go all out and push his world power to the limit. 8 million golden pillars of light extended from the five elements world's golden light barrier and wrapped around the meteor like tentacles. The meteor flew at an extremely high speed, bringing along the five element world with it for millions of miles. Finally, the power of the meteor was exhausted. Then the bright light of the meteor gradually extinguished, revealing the surface of the gold and silver star. Without a doubt, the metal content of this meteor had reached an astonishing level. 80% of the entire star was made of metal. These metals were all divine-grade treasures and excellent materials for refining all kinds of divine artifacts. Ji Tianxing controlled the five elements world and flew into the depths of the void while devouring this star. 3 months later, Ji Tianxing had refined the entire metal star. The five elements world seemed to have eaten its fill. Not only was its exhausted power replenished, but its size also doubled. As the world grew, sky, sea, and the five continents also quietly expanded. Even the living beings of the entire world sped up their reproduction and grew stronger imperceptibly. Most importantly, Ji Tianxing could clearly feel that his strength had doubled. He had already reached the peak of the true immortal realm and was close to becoming a half-step heavenly god. This result made him rather happy. I merged with the five elements world. The five elements world devoured the stars and grew stronger. My strength also grew along with it. Unfortunately, due to the heavenly Tao's rules, I can't break through to the heavenly god realm in the mortal world. Otherwise, I would be able to recover to the heavenly god realm after refining a few more stars. Not long after, the five elements world arrived near a certain world and stopped in the void. That world was protected by five-colored divine light. There were tens of billions of living beings and abundant resources inside. However, a heaven-conquering general led hundreds of battleships and firmly controlled the entire world. 30 billion martial artists and commoners submitted to the heaven-conquering race and were ordered and enslaved by the heaven-conquering race. Ji Tianxing led by Long Ji Wuhan Ji Wushuang, and the others to quietly invade this world. It took them 2 months to kill the general of the heaven-treading army, as well as more than 100 captains and more than 8,000 soldiers. They no longer cared about the rest of the matter, leaving it to that world's martial artists to deal with on their own. Ji Tianxing and the others quietly left, controlling the five elements world to continue roaming the void. 3 months later they saved another world and killed hundreds of martial gods and thousands of heaven-conquering warriors. At this moment, the Five Elements world had entered the hinterland of the Azure Sun Galaxy. In the void there would be a mortal world not too far away. 5 months later Lucid World was rescued. LV2 True God Realm expert, more than 80 captains and more than 6,000 soldiers had been killed by Ji Tianxing and the others. 8 months later the Changyang world was saved, and close to 10,000 Heaven Punishers were killed. 12 months later the Heaven Punisher race that controlled the Golden Cloud world was destroyed. 15 months later the Danxia world was rescued, and tens of billions of martial artists and commoners regained their freedom. 1.5 years later, as time passed, one world after another was rescued. The number of Heaven Punishers that had died to Ji Tianxing and the others also increased, to the point where it was almost impossible to count. During this process, Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang received the greatest amount of training. When everyone was flying, the two of them cultivated in seclusion in the Jutian 10 Absolutes Tower. When Ji Tianxing found a world and was about to carry out the rescue plan, the two of them would come out of seclusion to fight and kill the enemy. This continued. When Ji Tianxing had rescued over a dozen worlds, the two of them had naturally reached LV9 Martial God Realm. At the same time, they had accumulated enough battle experience, becoming valiant martial gods who had experienced hundreds of battles. Late at night, everyone had just entered the blazing sun world and was about to carry out the assassination plan. When Ji Wushuang saw Ji Tianxing's thoughtful expression, she asked, "Father, what are you thinking about? We've killed our way here and won every battle. Are you worried about something?" Seeing that his daughter was so attentive, Ji Tianxing did not hide anything. He nodded slightly and said, "I'm not worried about anything. I'm just puzzled. We've been in the Azure Sun Star Zone for almost 3 years. We've rescued over a dozen worlds and destroyed so many heaven-punishing fleets. Marshal Dong should have received the news long ago. Why hasn't he made a move yet?" Bai Long thought for a moment and said with a playful smile, "If Marshal Dong had received the news and gathered his elite fleets to intercept us, it would have been easy. We could have gotten rid of them all in one fell swoop. Then we wouldn't have to run around and rescue so many worlds. However, Marshal Dong probably wouldn't have the guts to intercept us after hearing Master's name. He would have pissed his pants in fear." Ji Wuhan shot a glance at Bai Long and said with an indifferent expression, "Eldest senior brother, you're so adept at seizing every opportunity and flattering others. Your skills have already reached the pinnacle of perfection. Junior brother admires you greatly." Bai Long was not embarrassed at all. He said earnestly, "Junior brother, although your family's background is unparalleled, your talent is unparalleled and your demeanor is extraordinary, but you can't always be so cold. Even if a beautiful woman falls in love with you, she will be scared away by you. You have to learn from me. Otherwise, you won't be able to get a wife in the future and make Master and Master's wife worried about you." Ji Wuhan's little face immediately became embarrassed. He said with a straight face, "Junior brother is still young. Senior brother worries too much." After saying that, he stopped talking to avoid being teased by Bai Long. Bai Long, however, did not let him go. He shook his head and sighed, "Alas, there are too many monks and too little gruel. There are too many wolves and too little meat. Junior brother, you can't let your guard down. You have to consider such a major life event as soon as possible. You have to start dating when you're still a baby." Ji Wuhan had always been cold and taciturn. How could he listen to such gossip? He became even more embarrassed. Ji Wushuang's little face was also red. He glared at Bai Long angrily, but he didn't know how to refute. Seeing that Bai Long was getting more and more enthusiastic, Ji Tianxing glared at him angrily. "Bai Long, don't talk nonsense and teach children bad things. Besides, you're still a loner. How can you have the nerve to talk about others?" Bai Long choked. He hurriedly smiled and said, "Master is right." "Who told you to talk nonsense and get scolded?" Ji Wushuang immediately covered his mouth and snickered, taking pleasure in Bai Long's misfortune. Ji Tianxing said seriously, "This time, we must capture the general of the fleet in order to save the blazing sun world. Leave him alive. I want to interrogate him properly and see if I can find any useful information." Bai Long, Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang, and the others all nodded solemnly to show that they understood. 2 days later, everyone finished deploying and began the killing plan. After half a month of fighting, More than 80% of the heaven-conquering fleet guarding the blazing sun world had been killed. General Gu Mo, who commanded the fleet, was also captured alive by Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing indeed obtained an important piece of information from this person. Chapter 2667. Originally, General Gu Mo would rather die than surrender, and he would not reveal the truth. However, the White Dragon soon showed him that some tortures were even more terrifying than death. Moreover, Ji Tianxing could use a soul-searching secret technique to directly devour his soul and memories. Only then did General Gu Mo's willpower crumble, and he honestly answered Ji Tianxing's question. According to his confession, Marshal Dong had been overseeing the Black Sun Star since the East conquering fleet occupied it. For the past 40 years, Marshal Dong had obtained a large amount of resources and treasures, and he had been cultivating in seclusion. Normally, he would only use communication jade slips to contact the generals and grasp the situation of the various worlds. However, 2 years ago something major happened in the Black Sun Star domain. A heaven-conquering fleet discovered a strange star when they were searching for resources and boundless divine stones in the scattered star sea. That star seemed huge, far larger than any mortal world, but only half of it remained. Moreover, the star was shrouded in a sacred golden light, and it emitted a glorious and vast divine aura. Inside the shattered golden light barrier, there were countless cities and kingdoms on the remaining half of the star. There were also tens of thousands of glorious divine temples. The architectural style of the planet was completely different from that of the mortal world. There were magnificent jade palaces, temples and mansions everywhere. After the star shattered, many cities, kingdoms and continents fell apart, and billions of buildings were turned into ruins. However, one could still see the former glory of those collapsed ruins and distorted cities. The heaven-conquering fleet boarded the shattered star and searched through the countless ruins. They found countless divine weapons and treasures. The star was filled with divine-grade resources, and there were also countless divine abilities and secret techniques. Unfortunately, most of the divine weapons and treasures were already damaged. The divine abilities, secret techniques, and books were also written in the language of the gods. The heaven-conquering fleet could not understand them at all. Even so, this discovery shocked them to the core and excited them to the extreme. They immediately sent out a message to report this matter to their general. That general knew that this matter was of great importance and most likely involved the gods, so he quickly reported it to Marshal Dong. Even though Marshal Dong was cultivating in seclusion, he was overjoyed when he heard this news, and quickly ended his seclusion. After some preparations, Marshal Dong led a large number of guards and rushed to the scattered star sea to check the situation of the broken star. It didn't take long for the news to spread throughout the Azure Sun galaxy. The martial gods of the various worlds also realized that the star had something to do with the gods. If he could obtain some benefits from the stars, he might be able to greatly increase his strength and even ascend to the upper realm. Therefore, many martial gods, space pirates, and explorers had gathered in groups and headed to the star. Heroes from all walks of life gathered on that star, and inevitably, a great battle broke out. In order to monopolize that star, Marshal Zhendong gave the order to mobilize a large number of fleets to reinforce it. Just 10 days ago, General Gu Mo received the marshal's order. He was currently gathering his troops and preparing to head to the scattered star seas as reinforcements. Unexpectedly, before he could leave the scorching sun world, he had fallen into Ji Tianxing's hands. After hearing the news, Ji Tianxing and Bai Long looked at each other with a hint of surprise in their eyes. The two of them said in unison, "Divine Star." Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang looked puzzled. They asked curiously, "Father, what's a divine star?" Qian Yu, Black Dragon, Blue Kuan, and the Glazed Fire Dragon also looked expectant as they stared at Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing explained calmly, "The vast god realm gathers the gods from 3,000 worlds. There are tens of thousands of races, and naturally, there are tens of thousands of divine abilities and cultivation methods. The majority of the gods absorb the power of the stars and cultivate divine Tao laws to increase their strength. However, there are also a small number of gods who use the path of faith to quickly increase their strength while cultivating. They rule or raise many living beings, and have their people worship them to provide them with the power of faith. The weaker gods can rule a tribe, a city, or even a country. However, the powerful divine kings can refine an entire star. They raise tens of billions of living beings on the star to provide them with the power of faith. These stars that are refined by the divine kings to raise believers are called divine stars. After listening to Ji Tianxing's explanation, Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang, and the 4 divine beasts were enlightened. White Dragon added, as the divine king's strength increases, the divine star can also expand. Moreover, the divine king's methods are exceedingly powerful, and he can store the divine star in his body and carry it with him. In his previous life, Master roamed the world and killed many divine kings. He also crushed several divine stars with his bare hands. Ji Wuhan and the others listened with fascination, and they all looked shocked and surprised. Qian Yu smiled and said, I roughly understand. For example, old Ji has refined the 5 elements world. This world is equivalent to his divine star. It's just that old Ji didn't establish faith and let the people of the 5 elements world believe in him. Ji Tianxing nodded and said, that's right, that's the reason. Now that I'm in the mortal world, even if I use the path of faith to gather the power of faith, I can't break through to the heavenly God realm. Let's not waste time. When I return to the divine realm in the future, if I want to increase my strength quickly, I might consider this method. Ji Wuhan thought for a while and said solemnly, according to what Father said, the shattered star in the scattered star ocean should be a divine king's divine star. However, that divine king might have met with misfortune, so his divine star shattered and fell into the void. Since Marshal Dong Zhenzhong and a large number of heaven punishers are on that divine star, how can we miss this opportunity? Why don't we also rush to that divine star and capture Marshal Dong Zhenzhong and the others in one fell swoop? Although Ji Wuhan's wish was very strong, he still needed to ask Ji Tianxing for permission to make the decision. Everyone turned to look at Ji Tianxing, waiting for him to make the decision. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said, no hurry, I'll ask another question. Then he turned to General Guemo and asked in the Heaven Punishers language, on that star, other than the Heaven Punishers, the martial gods of various worlds and the space pirates, are there any other experts? There were originally living beings on that star. Were there any survivors? Previously, everyone had been conversing in the human language, so General Guemo couldn't understand. Therefore he didn't know what exactly that shattered star was. Being pressed by Ji Tianxing, he could only answer truthfully, I don't know either. The marshal's orders didn't mention this. Ji Tianxing frowned and asked a few more questions. However, General Gumo's knowledge was limited, so he couldn't answer at all. Seeing that he was no longer of any use, Ji Tianxing gave White Dragon a look and left with the others. White Dragon understood tacitly and killed General Guemo with a punch. After destroying the corpse, he left with the others. Chapter 2668. After leaving the blazing sun world, Ji Tianxing controlled the 5 elements world and rushed to the scattered star sea. It had been 2 years since that divine planet appeared in the scattered star sea. He couldn't help but worry if Marshal Dong and the heaven-conquering fleet were still on the divine planet. Could it be that they had already plundered all the divine items and left the divine planet? If he was late, he would have come here empty-handed, and it would have been a wasted trip. He only hoped that Marshal Dong's occupation of the divine planet wouldn't be so smooth. Only then would he have a chance to capture Marshal Dong and the fleet in one fell swoop and quickly stabilize the situation in the Azure Sun Galaxy. The scattered star sea was at the edge of the Azure Sun Galaxy and was very far from the blazing sun planet. Even if the 5 elements world flew at full speed, it still took more than a year to arrive. When they were close to the scattered star sea, Ji Tianxing, Bai Long, and the others stood on the divine light barrier and looked into the void ahead. They saw millions of scattered and chaotic stars gathered in the void to form an ocean. There was no order to the arrangement of the stars, nor was there any order to it. As far as the eye could see, they could see many vortexes formed by void storms and blazing white folded spaces. Clearly, the scattered star sea was not peaceful. There were too many hidden dangers and dangers. Bai Long frowned and said in a serious tone, Master, the 5 elements world is too big. It can't enter the scattered star sea and move around freely. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said, Of course. I don't plan to let the 5 elements world enter the scattered star sea. With that, he took out the Tianxing battleship and led everyone and the 4 divine beasts into the battleship. Bai Long steered the Tianxing battleship and turned into a black light that entered the void and flew toward the scattered star sea. The 5 elements world stopped flying and stayed at the edge of the scattered star sea. With the protection of the divine light barrier, almost no one could invade the 5 elements world. Moreover, Jiku and Yunyao stayed in the divine pagoda. If there was an ignorant fellow who dared to sneak into the five elements world, only death awaited him. The Tianqing battleship was thousands of feet long. Compared to the stars in the sky, it was so small that it could be ignored. But it was also because of this that the Tianqing battleship was very agile, easy to hide and not easy to discover. White dragons steered the warship through the chaotic star sea, heading straight for the depths of the stars. Even though the stars were densely packed with dangers, there were many void storms and divine flames, many folded spaces and even a black hole. However, the White Dragon could always detect danger in advance and easily avoid dangerous areas. 1 month later, through the light screen in the warship, everyone saw a dazzling golden star appear in the void in front of them. That star was quite special. It shone with dazzling golden light, appearing extremely mysterious. In comparison, the dozens of stars in the surroundings were somewhat overshadowed. The golden star was very big, but only half of it was left. It was like an apple that had been broken in half. Everyone could recognize at a glance that that half-golden star was precisely the divine star they were looking for. White Dragon was in high spirits as he piloted the Tianqing battleship towards the divine star. It only took 5 days for the battleship to pass through the damaged golden light shield and land on the divine planet. As the battleship flew on the surface of the divine planet, White Dragon's expression was focused on the surroundings, vigilant. Tianqing and the others released their divine senses to investigate the land on the surface of the divine planet, carefully observing it. They saw that the vast land was filled with cracks, forming tens of thousands of ravines. One after another, deep abysses and giant pits were scattered across the land. Many forests and mountain peaks were buried within, as well as villages and cities. The ruins of the shattered cities were filled with broken bricks and broken walls, still recounting the glory of the past. The layout of the cities, the style of the buildings, and the many divine temples and statues were just as General Guillemot had said. They were filled with a divine and dignified feeling. Tianqing could tell at a glance that this was obviously the style of the divine world. The battleship flew close to the land for 8 hours, seeing hundreds of collapsed and damaged cities, but not a single living thing. Not only did they not see a living person, they also did not see a single corpse. At this moment, a huge ruin appeared on the vast plains in front of them. Piles of bricks and glazed tiles, as well as sturdy and thick broken walls, were scattered across the land in a radius of 400 miles. Everyone could see that this ruin was once a glorious main city that could hold at least 5 million people. However, all of the prosperity had been buried, and the ruin was covered with a layer of ash. Tianqing extended his divine sense and covered the entire ruin, carefully inspecting it. Suddenly, he sensed the presence of the Heaven Punisher at the center of the ruin. "Stop!" he immediately ordered. White Dragon immediately did as he was told and had Tianqing's battleship stop above the ruin. Tianqing's divine sense continued to search, and he quickly found out what was going on. There was a giant pit in the center of the ruin, and under the cover of countless bricks and rubble, there was a remnant of a divine temple. The style of the divine temple was very unique. It was ancient, dignified, sacred, and mysterious. There were tall and grand palaces, countless giant stone pillars, and stone sculptures and divine portraits everywhere. A group of Heaven Punisher experts was searching for something in the divine temple. Nearly 200 black-armored warriors, armed with swords, sabers, and spears, surrounded the temple. 2 captains in golden armor were carefully inspecting the divine temple with 20 guards. In addition, Tianqing's divine sense also detected the presence of a martial god of a foreign tribe hiding in the darkness at the bottom of the divine temple. He could not help but murmur, "It seems that Marshal Dong Zhendong is still in control of the situation. The martial gods of the foreign tribes are not willing to leave, so they can only hide from the Heaven Punishers." Then he left Tianqing's battleship with Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang, and the 4 divine beasts. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The group flew across the sky and arrived above the giant pit. Their divine senses locked onto the divine temple in the ruins. They did not hide their presence, nor did they hide their presence. They appeared openly. The Heaven Punishers surrounding the divine temple immediately discovered Tianqing and the others. Immediately, more than 50 black-armored warriors waved their swords and charged at the group. Tianqing and his sons did not even need to attack. The glass fire dragon opened its mouth and spat out glass golden flames, which covered the sky and drowned the black-armored warriors. Whoosh! Under the glass golden flames, the 50 black-armored warriors had no chance to dodge or resist. They were burned to ashes. The bricks and rubble that buried the divine temple were also burned into dark red lava, which flowed into the giant pit and cracks. The ruined divine temple was revealed. More than 100 surviving black-armored warriors also showed expressions of anger and fear. Cries of alarm came from the crowd. A few captains roared angrily and gave the order to attack together. However, Qian Yu and Black Dragon used divine techniques at the same time, releasing icy light and black water that covered the sky. Whoosh! Boom! Under the icy blue light, dozens of black-armored warriors were frozen to dust. The North Underworld black water fell from the sky and corroded the surviving black-armored warriors into white bones. In the blink of an eye, the area outside the divine temple was empty. Chapter 2669. The commotion from the battle had alerted the heaven punishers in the divine temple. Sui Meng Xiao Shuo Suiming Calm. When the two captains rushed out of the divine temple with their guards, they were dumbfounded by the scene before them. The divine temple was covered in lava and black water, but the 200 black-armored warriors had disappeared without a trace. The two captains looked up at the sky and glared at Ji Tianxing and the others with hatred. There was a hint of fear in their eyes. The 20 black-armored guards were also at a loss. They did not know whether they should take the initiative to attack or not. At this moment, the captain on the left took out a communication jade slip. He wanted to send a message and ask for reinforcements. Lan Kuan did not hesitate to spit out 6 pillars of water toward the heaven punishers. Boom 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 boom. The poor captain did not even have time to send a message before he was blasted into pieces by the water pillars. The other captain and the 20 black-armored guards did not have time to escape. They were all killed on the spot by the water pillars. The terrifying impact turned the already dilapidated divine temple into a pile of rubble. Not a single stone pillar or tile could be found. At this point, the 200 or so heaven punishers had all been killed. Lan Kuan closed its huge mouth in satisfaction and secretly glanced at Ji Tianxing. It originally thought that since Qian Yu, the Black Dragon, and Azure Li had all fought, it should also perform. Ji Tianxing would definitely praise it for interrupting the other party's message in such a timely manner. However, it did not expect Ji Tianxing to frown slightly. A hint of pity flashed across his eyes. Lan Kuan's eyes dimmed. It was a little depressed, but it did not understand the reason. Ji Wushuang saw through its thoughts and explained to it, "Big fish, you shouldn't have interrupted the captain's transmission and you shouldn't have killed them all. If that captain had sent a message, more heaven punishers would have been attracted. We could have killed them all and saved a lot of time. Also, I originally wanted to leave one alive to interrogate the heaven punishers." Lan Kuan nodded to show that he understood. He looked at Ji Tianxing apologetically and said in a muffled voice, "Master, I'm sorry." Ji Tianxing calmly waved his hand and said, "It doesn't matter. They are just some shrimp soldiers and crab generals. As for information, isn't there another person in the temple?" As he spoke, he looked at the ruins of the temple with a playful gaze. His tone was calm as he said, "Why aren't you showing yourself? How long do you plan to hide?" In order to make the other party understand, he did not use the human language. Instead, he used the heaven-punishing race's language. The aura of the martial god under the temple paused for a moment. However, that aura was immediately restrained, hiding even deeper. Ji Tianxing immediately smiled. He raised his hand and shot out a golden sword light, piercing into the darkness underground. Boom! The sword light pierced through the ruins and blasted into the ground, exploding with a muffled bang. Countless rocks and soil were blasted away, causing dust to fill the air. However, the sword light did not contain any killing intent when it struck the martial god's aura. However, the owner of that aura was alarmed. He instinctively moved 10,000 feet away, revealing his whereabouts. He knew that his whereabouts had been discovered. While he was shocked, he hesitated for a moment before burrowing out of the ground and flying into the sky. Whoosh! A tall figure covered in black fog appeared in the sky above the ruins. He stood 10,000 feet away from Ji Tianxing and the others. Within the rising black fog was a martial god of a foreign race who was 30 feet tall and looked like a minotaur. This person wore a loose black robe and a cloak. He held a black cloth banner in his hand. Ji Tianxing could tell at a glance that the simple and shabby banner was a divine artifact. It could hide one's aura. No wonder he could hide under the temple and avoid the heaven-punishing race's search. It's because of that banner. That banner should be a divine artifact he found on the divine planet. It was originally a heavenly god-level divine artifact, but it has been damaged and has been reduced to a true god-level divine artifact. Just as these thoughts flashed through his mind, the martial god of a foreign race bowed to him and said in the heaven-punishing race's language, "Thank you, Senior, for saving me. I am Wild Bull, the divine master of the fog planet. If Senior had not saved me, I would have been killed. This humble one will never forget this kindness." The fog planet where Wild Bull was from had also been taken over by the heaven-punishing race. He had fought with the heaven-punishing race for more than 100 years. Of course, he had mastered their language. He could see that not only was Ji Tianxing's strength unfathomable, but even the 4 divine beasts were also very powerful. As he was very respectful. He did not dare to be impudent or run away. Ji Tianxing looked at him calmly and said, "Wild Bull, you don't have to play tricks in front of me. I killed the heaven-punishing race because I happened to pass by. The heaven-punishing race deserved to die. I did not do it to save you. In fact, even if I did not do anything, you could have escaped the heaven-punishing race's search with the banner in your hand." A few simple words had seen through Wild Bull's thoughts and revealed the truth. Wild Bull's body shook slightly. Surprise flashed through his bell-sized eyes, and his posture became even more humble. "Senior's eyes are as sharp as torches. Wild Bull admires you greatly." It was Wild Bull who judged a gentleman with his own mean heart. "I have embarrassed myself in front of Senior. Please forgive me. Since Senior has ordered Wild Bull to appear, you must have something to teach me. Please tell me." Ji Tianxing smiled when he saw Wild Bull's response. He nodded slightly and said, "You look like a brute, but you are actually clever and adaptable. You are a talent that can be molded. Since you are so sensible, I will not waste my breath and will say it directly. I am not here to search for treasures. I am here to deal with Martial Dong. You have been active on this planet for a long time. You should know the whereabouts of the heaven-punishing fleet in Martial Dong, right?" "What?" Wild Bull was shocked. He raised his head and looked at Ji Tianxing in disbelief. "Senior, you really want to deal with Martial Dong? That bastard is a true god expert who controls the entire Azure Sun galaxy. Moreover, he has mobilized more than 100 heaven-punishing fleet captains and more than 8,000 heaven-punishing soldiers to explore this broken planet. He is very powerful." Before Ji Tianxing could speak, Ji Wuxia said proudly, "You stupid bull, since my father is here to deal with Martial Dong, he is very confident. Why do you need to worry? Do you know who my father is? Previously, in the Purple Cloud Galaxy, my father killed Martial Dong and destroyed the entire South Conquering Fleet. Along the way we have killed more than 100,000 Heaven Punishers and saved more than 100 worlds. Soon the East Conquering Fleet will collapse and the Azure Sun Galaxy will regain its freedom. At that time my father will be the saint who saved the Azure Sun Galaxy. However, my father has always been indifferent to fame and fortune. He will not bicker with a stupid bull like you." Wild Bull stared at Ji Wuxia dumbfounded. His body stiffened and his heart was in turmoil. After a long while he came back to his senses and stuttered, "Young heroine, may I ask, who is your father?" Ji Wuxia answered proudly, "He is the invincible god of war Tianxing, the nemesis of the Heaven Punishers." Chapter 2670. Ji Wuxia answered smoothly with an arrogant expression. Ji Tianxing, Ji Wuhan, and the 4 divine beasts all had calm expressions on their faces, as if nothing had happened. However, the father and son and the 4 divine beasts were all muttering in their hearts. "Sigh, this girl is really... Father's name of Kenshin is famous throughout the universe. Why did Yaya change father's name?" However, Wild Bull could not tell whether Ji Wuxia was telling the truth or not. Since the other party was so confident and arrogant and his strength was so mysterious, then he would just believe it. Wild Bull's attitude became even more humble, and he even showed some admiration as he bowed deeply to Ji Tianxing. Junior Wild Bull pays his respects to war god Tianxing. Junior is ignorant and did not know of Senior's great achievements. You have saved the entire starfield and saved millions of warriors and people. It is Wild Bull's good fortune to meet a saint like Senior in this life. A lot of flattery poured out like a flood, but Ji Tianxing did not have the patience to listen and interrupted him with a wave of his hand. You don't have to say these hypocritical words. Just tell me everything you know about Marshal Dong. Wild Bull also knew when to stop. After confirming that Ji Tianxing did not have any ill intentions, he did not speak any more nonsense to avoid offending him. He did not hesitate to say yes and answered truthfully, Senior Tianxing, I came to this broken star a year ago. At that time, Marshal Dong led hundreds of battleships to plunder treasures on this broken star and killed martial gods and explorers of various races. However, the martial gods, explorers and space pirates of various races came one after another, and the broken star was too big. Even though Marshal Dong was powerful, he did not have enough manpower. Therefore, Junior and the many martial gods and explorers all had a fluke heart. We searched for treasures on this broken star while avoiding the pursuit of the heaven punishers. Marshal Dong also sped up the search for treasures and gathered more battleships to support us. Junior received news a few days ago that a group of space pirates found a paradise in a mountain range thousands of miles away. There were a lot of divine weapons and treasures hidden there. When the East-conquering Marshal heard the news, he had already gathered a large group of heaven punishers to snatch it. Junior's strength is weak, so naturally I don't dare to wade into the muddy waters. I can only eat a sumptuous meal in a remote place. When he heard this, Ji Tianxing understood and nodded to show that he understood. He then asked Wild Bull about the specific location of the mountain range and other questions. Wild Bull was very sensible. After answering respectfully, he bowed and said, Senior, if you don't have any other instructions, this junior will take his leave. Ji Tianxing waved his hand indicating that he could leave. Only then did Wild Bull feel as if he had been granted amnesty. He hurriedly bowed and left before turning around and flying away. When he left the ruins, he realized that his back was drenched in sweat, and beads of sweat had appeared on his forehead. There was nothing he could do about it. Ji Tianxing's divine might was too heavy, and the pressure he felt was too terrifying. He had a vague premonition that trouble was coming for Marshal Zhendong. Ji Tianxing and the others were not in a hurry to leave. Everyone stood above the ruins and released their divine senses to explore the temple below. Not long after, Tianxing's battleship flew over from afar. Zhou Xian flew out of the battleship, his hands flickering with golden light as he grabbed a large pile of rubble. He placed over 100 pieces of rubble in front of Ji Tianxing and said with a strange expression, Master, look at these. Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang, and the 4 divine beasts all looked at the rubble with puzzled expressions. It's just some rubble. What's there to see? Old Bai, why are you looking for these rubble instead of divine artifacts and treasures? Ji Tianxing frowned as he sized up the pile of rubble. He immediately saw the clues. These rubble contain rich divine power of faith. It's obvious that they're often worshipped by believers. Bai Long, are these the divine stones from the broken statue? Bai Long hurriedly nodded and explained, That's right. I had nothing to do just now, so I searched the ruins and noticed this pile of rubble buried underground. I simply pieced these rubble together and sure enough, it's a statue. Moreover, there's something wrong with that statue. As he spoke, Bai Long quickly waved his hands and pieced those millstone-sized rubble together piece by piece. Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang also became interested and hurriedly helped him piece the rubble together. After a short 10 breaths, over 100 pieces of rubble were pieced together to form a statue of a god that was dozens of meters tall. Moreover, this statue only had the upper body and the head. The rest of the statue was incomplete. It could be foreseen that if it was a complete statue, its height would be close to 300 meters. Zhou Bai Long shot out a golden light that wrapped around the 100 pieces of rubble, gluing them together and presenting them in front of Ji Tianxing. Master, doesn't this statue look a bit like it? Ji Tianxing looked at the statue that was full of cracks and immediately frowned. A strange light flashed in his eyes. It was a statue of a god with a human body and an eagle head that was suffused with gold. Although the statue was full of cracks, the carvings were exquisite and lifelike. This god with a human body and an eagle head had a vigorous body and a slender neck. The eagle head was round and majestic, and there were 3 golden feathers on top of its head. Its dark golden eyes also protruded outwards. Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang, and the 4 divine beasts couldn't see where the problem was. They only knew that this god should be the master of the god star, the god king worshipped by billions of believers. Only Ji Tianqing and Bai Long knew that they knew this god and were familiar with it. God King Heavenly Eagle. It must be him. After a long time, Ji Tianqing sighed with a complicated tone and said, I didn't expect that today after 1,000 years, we'd be reborn and he'd fall. Sigh. Bai Long was also full of emotion. He said in a heavy tone, God King Heavenly Eagle had always been aloof from worldly affairs. He was a famous king of 1,000 mountains. Even when that storm swept across the god realm, he didn't participate. He shouldn't have any enemies and his strength was not ordinary. He could be ranked in the top 100 of the God King list. How could he be killed by other God Kings? Hearing Ji Tianqing and Bai Long's discussion, Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang, and the 4 divine beasts became more and more confused. Qian Yu couldn't help but ask, Old Ji, is this God King Heavenly Eagle the master of the God's Star? What's your relationship with him? Are you friends or? Ji Tianqing remained silent, a thoughtful expression on his face. Bai Long answered, God King Heavenly Eagle was the master of the 1,000 Mountains region. He ruled over hundreds of divine kingdoms and was also the king of gods. He was gentle and open-minded and basically didn't participate in the disputes for fame and fortune. Most of the time he was in seclusion to comprehend the great Tao. That's why he was called the King of Leisure. Back then, Master controlled the Heavenly Mountain region which was right next to the 1,000 Mountains region. Not only did Master and God King Heavenly Eagle have no conflicts or grievances, they even helped each other and joined hands to resist the persecution of other God Kings. So he was one of Master's few friends. Unfortunately, after 1,000 years, things have remained the same but people have changed. He actually fell. Chapter 2671. After Bai Long's explanation, everyone finally understood the relationship between Ji Tianqing and Heavenly Eagle Deity King. No one would have thought that the owner of this fallen god star was actually Ji Tianqing's old friend. Everyone's mood was somewhat heavy as they sighed and lamented. At this time Bai Long saw that Ji Tianqing's expression was strange and opened his mouth to ask, Master, are you thinking about the cause of Heavenly Eagle Deity King's death? Ji Tianqing collected his thoughts and nodded slightly saying, That's right, Heavenly Eagle Deity King rarely offended people and his own strength was also not bad. There were not many who could kill him. Master is thinking, could it be that those bastards saw that Heavenly Eagle Deity King and Master had a friendship and took their anger out on him? Bai Long hurriedly shook his head and advised, Master, although this is possible before the matter is clear, you shouldn't make a rash decision and even more so, don't blame yourself for this. Ji Tianqing looked up at the void with a deep gaze and said in a solemn tone, For many years Master has always had a bad premonition. The current God realm is probably no longer the same as back then. For us to return to the God realm and take revenge, it will definitely be extremely dangerous. But no matter what, Master has to kill his way back. Not only do I have to take revenge back then, I also have to investigate the cause of Heavenly Eagle Deity King's death. Bai Long nodded his head in agreement and did not say anything. The atmosphere was somewhat heavy. Everyone stared blankly for a moment before boarding Tianqing's battleship and flying towards the north. According to Wild Bull, tens of millions of miles away in the north, there was an endless stretch of towering and majestic mountain range. The paradise discovered by the space pirates was in that mountain range. At present, Marshal Dong had already brought a large group of powerhouses and rushed over. This was an excellent opportunity to Ji Tianqing. How could he miss it? On the way, the group saw the shattered land. Everywhere there were cities that had turned into ruins and temples that had collapsed. Occasionally they would encounter some foreign martial gods or explorers that roamed the starry skies, carefully searching in the ruins. Other than that, they actually did not see a single believer on the god star, not even a corpse. 6 hours later, Tianqing's battleship flew over the sky above a certain ruin and suddenly encountered a heaven-conquering battleship. That battleship was also hurrying along, heading straight for the north. It seemed to have some sort of mission on its shoulders. Even when it sensed the existence of Tianqing's battleship, it had no intention of attacking or intercepting. However, even if it did not provoke the Tianqing battleship, it did not mean that Ji Tianqing would let it go. Shua. With a flash, Ji Tianqing flew out of the battleship. He flickered in the sky and after a few teleportations he caught up with the heaven-conquering battleship. He took out the Burial of Heaven sword and slashed it fiercely. The dazzling golden sword light that was thousands of feet long slashed toward the battleship with the power to split the heavens and earth. At the critical moment, the heaven-conquering battleship sensed that death was approaching, and it hurriedly dodged. However, the speed of the warship was too slow, and it was unable to dodge the sword light. Boom! With a loud bang, the heaven-slicing battleship was cut in half and fell from the sky. More than 30 soldiers in black armor flew out from the wreckage of the warship. Before they could stabilize their bodies, Ji Tianqing swung his sword and slashed out a few more dazzling golden sword lights. Chua, chua, chua. With a flash of the sword light, the more than 30 soldiers in black armor were killed on the spot. The two halves of the battleship were about to fall to the ground. Ji Tianqing swung his left fist and used the Dragon Elephant Divine Fist, slamming it fiercely toward the wreckage of the warship on the left. He swung the Burial of Heaven sword with his right hand and slashed out a giant sword light that could split the heavens and earth, slashing toward the half of the warship on the right. The dozens of surviving soldiers in black armor flew out of the warship in a panic, trying to escape. The captain in golden armor also rushed out of the warship furiously and swung his sword at Ji Tianqing. However, their resistance and escape were futile. Boom! With a loud bang, the wreckage of the warship on the left was blasted into pieces, and the dozens of soldiers in black armor were smashed into pieces. A huge crater with a radius of 100 miles was created on the ground, and dust flew up into the sky. Boom! The half of the warship on the right was also smashed into pieces by the giant sword. The captain in golden armor was directly killed, and pieces of flesh and blood splattered all over the sky. The giant sword landed on the ground, creating a deep ravine that was 300 miles long like an abyss. The dozen or so surviving black-armored warriors all ran away in fear. Ji Tianqing chased after them and killed them all with a few swings of his sword. After quickly finishing off the Tianqing battleship, Ji Tianqing did not stop and hurriedly returned to the Tianqing battleship. The Tianqing battleship continued on its journey and did not waste any time. As time passed, the Tianqing battleship was getting closer and closer to its target. In the next 2 days, the group passed by hundreds of ruined cities and found a few adventurers. In addition, they also encountered 3 Tianqing battleships, which were ordered to rush to support Marshal Zhendong. The fate of the 3 Tianqing battleships was no surprise. They were all killed by Ji Tianqing and turned into dregs. 3 days later, the Tianqing battleship finally arrived at its destination and flew into the majestic and boundless mountain range. The mountain range was huge and stretched for millions of miles from east to west. It was filled with peaks, deep ravines and ravines. Most of the peaks had collapsed and the ravines and abysses were filled with debris. However, compared to the fragmented land, the mountain range was relatively well preserved. Bai Long drove the battleship and shuttled between the mountains, searching for the entrance to the Blessed Enclave. Ji Tianqing released his divine consciousness and explored the surrounding tens of thousands of miles, constantly monitoring the surrounding movements. 4 hours later, the Tianqing battleship entered the depths of the mountain range. At this time, Ji Tianqing found some scattered martial gods of the foreign tribes in the surrounding mountain range. Most of them formed teams and moved together. There were a total of more than a dozen teams, with at least 3 to 5 people and at most a dozen people. They were all powerful experts. Moreover, most of the teams had battleships and flying divine artifacts. The more than a dozen treasure hunting teams like Ji Tianqing and the others were also wandering around the mountain range, searching for the entrance to the Blessed Enclave. Obviously, they had also heard the news and wanted to get a share of the loot. However, they could not find the entrance to the Blessed Enclave, so they could only search blindly in the mountain range. Ji Tianqing ignored the exploration teams and asked Bai Long to continue to the depths of the mountain range. The Tianqing battleship moved alone and flew north without stopping. This made many exploration teams focus their attention on the Tianqing battleship and follow it quietly. An hour later, the Tianqing battleship encountered a heaven-conquering battleship. The battleship seemed to know where the entrance to the Blessed Enclave was. It flew across the sky at an extremely fast speed and went straight to the northwest. Ji Tianqing quickly followed and destroyed the battleship with his sword alone. He killed hundreds of black-armored soldiers and captured the severely injured captain of the gold-armored battleship. Then he used the soul-searching secret skill to extract the memory of the gold-armored battleship and learn the entrance to the Blessed Enclave. Chapter 2672. The exploration teams following the Tianqing battleship wanted to take advantage of the situation. They also wanted to stop the heaven-attacking battleship, capture the captain, and interrogate him about the location of the Blessed Land. However, they had witnessed Ji Tianqing's power with their own eyes. He had easily destroyed the heaven-attacking battleship and killed many heaven-attacking experts by himself with a divine sword. Such ferocious and overbearing methods caused all the martial gods of the foreign races to be shocked, and they were flabbergasted. In fear, they could only give up on the idea. The 9 teams followed the Tianqing battleship and flew northwest. Inside the Tianqing battleship, Bai Long frowned when he saw the 9 teams following them. A cold light flashed in his eyes. "Master, those reckless fellows are most likely following us because they want to take advantage of the situation and fish in troubled waters. Do you want me to teach them a lesson?" Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said with an indifferent expression, "Those foreign martial gods and explorers have no grudge against us, but they have a deep grudge against the Heaven Punisher race. Don't worry about them. They might be useful when we get there." "Understood," Bai Long replied and continued to control the battleship. Soon the Tianqing battleship arrived above a huge valley. The valley was 500 miles wide. It was like a basin in the mountains and was covered by clouds. There were more than a dozen mountains around the valley. They were like loyal and brave guards guarding the valley's secret. This was the entrance to the Blessed Land. There was no one around the valley. Those who did not know would not have noticed this place. Even the valley that was shrouded in clouds and mist was desolate and quiet. There were no traces of any martial artists. However, Ji Tianqing's fiery golden eyes saw through it immediately. The entire valley was shrouded in a true god-level bewildering array. On the surface, the valley was shrouded in clouds and mist, looking very ordinary. However, there must be a large number of heaven-attacking warriors gathered in the valley. Swish! Ji Tianqing put away the battleship and stood above the valley, looking down at the clouds. White Dragon Ji Wuhan Ji Wushuang, and the 4 divine beasts all stood behind him, sizing up the surroundings. The 9 exploration teams had followed them to this place. When they saw Ji Tianqing and the others stop and put away their battleships, they hurriedly stopped as well. Everyone realized that there was something wrong with this valley. It was most likely the entrance to the Blessed Enclave. At the thought of this, many foreign race martial gods and explorers were excited and full of anticipation. However, they were afraid of Ji Tianqing's terrifying strength and didn't dare to step into the valley. They all stayed at the edge of the valley and silently watched Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing didn't waste any time. He swung his fist and unleashed a dazzling golden fist aura that was as big as a mountain, blasting towards the clouds beneath his feet. Instantly, the terrifying fist radiance struck the maze formation. If the strength of the fist glow was only at the martial god realm, it would be absorbed and dissolved by the formation immediately. But the power of this punch of Ji Tianqing's reached peak true god. Boom! A deafening sound exploded and reverberated in the sky above the valley. The invisible maze formation was activated. A 500-mile-wide purple light barrier appeared in the clouds. However, the semicircular purple light barrier was smashed into pieces by the fist radiance, creating a huge hole. Countless purple light fragments scattered and created a hurricane in the sky above the valley. The 9 teams around the valley and more than 60 foreign race martial gods were all shocked, surprised, and expectant. The appearance of the purple light barrier confirmed their guess. The valley in front of them was the entrance to the Blessed Enclave. The greedy and shameless East-conquering marshal had set up a divine formation to seal the valley. He wanted to take the Blessed Enclave for himself. If it weren't for Ji Tianqing's powerful strength, the dozens of foreign race martial gods would have been ready to take action. Swoosh! Ji Tianqing and the others passed through the gap in the purple light barrier and landed in the valley. When they passed through the clouds and entered the maze formation, they finally saw the true situation in the valley. They saw the ruins of a huge palace in the middle of the valley. There was a huge dilapidated divine temple in the ruins. Countless broken walls and broken stone pillars could be seen. The divine temple was surrounded by ancient rocks and was guarded by more than 300 black-armored warriors. In addition, there were thousands of Heaven Punisher warriors around the palace ruins. They held sharp swords and were on high alert. There were 24 Heaven Punisher martial gods in golden armor in the sky above the divine temple ruins. They were arranged in a special formation. More than 1,300 members of the Heaven Punisher clan formed 3 layers of defense around the dilapidated temple. Their protection was impenetrable. Ji Tianqing and the others immediately understood the obvious formation. The entrance to the blessed enclave was that ancient dilapidated divine temple. At this moment the 24 golden-armored martial gods roared angrily. They raised their arms and shouted out orders. More than 200 black-armored warriors immediately flew out from the outermost layer of defense. They charged toward Ji Tianqing and the others without any regard for their own safety. They surrounded and attacked them with murderous intent. In an instant, an overwhelming amount of red light flew over and covered the sky above the valley. Thousands of saber lights, sword shadows, giant axes, long sabers and ferocious and terrifying phantoms drowned Ji Tianqing and the others. However, Ji Tianqing stood with his hands behind his back. He looked calm and didn't intend to attack. Bai Long, Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang and the 4 divine beasts waved their swords and released divine powers that could destroy the world. All kinds of white, golden, icy blue, black and crimson divine light poured down like a flood. Boom, 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 boom. A series of earth-shattering noises exploded in the valley and resounded in the universe. The valley within a radius of 500 miles shook violently, and the surrounding mountain peaks shook as well, causing countless rocks and dust to roll down. Such a terrifying explosion caused the exploration teams that had just stepped into the valley to stop in their tracks, their hearts filled with shock. When the lights in the sky disappeared, everyone finally saw the scene in the valley. Ji Tianqing and the others weren't injured at all. They stood in the sky like mountains. More than 200 murderous warriors of the heavenly expedition collapsed, turning into a pile of flesh and blood that scattered in the ruins. Suddenly, dozens of martial gods and explorers couldn't help but gasp. The 24 golden-armored martial gods who were guarding the ruins and the divine temple also changed their expressions dramatically, revealing a deep sense of fear. The next moment, those golden-armored martial gods came back to their senses and hurriedly shouted and roared. Strong enemies are invading. Stop them. Kill them immediately at all costs. What are you waiting for, you idiots? So more than 1,000 black-armored warriors attacked Ji Tianqing and the others. The 24 golden-armored martial gods also formed a battle formation and jointly performed divine powers and secret arts, releasing purple light into the sky. Such an astonishing and terrifying attack was enough to raise thousands of miles of mountains to the ground. The 9 exploration teams quickly retreated from the valley, afraid that they would be affected. However, Ji Tianqing, Bai Long and the others were fearless as they launched their counterattacks in an orderly manner. Chapter 2673. Bam, 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 boom, boom. Deafening booms and explosions from the collision of divine lights reverberated in the valley. This battle with a huge disparity in numbers only lasted for 100 breaths before it ended. The more than 60 martial gods from the 9 teams were worried for Ji Tianqing and the others. After all, the difference in numbers between the two sides was more than 100 times. Moreover, the divine light that covered the sky and the sun shrouded the valley. They could not see Ji Tianqing and the others at all. Many martial gods and explorers hoped that Ji Tianqing and the others would win. Even though this was not very realistic and there was little hope. Perhaps Ji Tianqing and the others would have to pay a terrible price to win. That was what everyone wanted to see. Only when Ji Tianqing and the others killed all the heaven punishers could they enter the grotto heaven and blessed lands to explore the fortuitous opportunity. Not long after, the dazzling divine light dissipated. The deafening sounds of collisions and explosions gradually stopped. The chaotic valley gradually became clear. Only then did the martial gods and adventurers see the situation in the valley clearly. They saw that the ruins within 100 miles had completely disappeared. All that was left was a huge crater and a few dozen huge pieces of gravel. Those were the remaining rocks from the temple that had been destroyed. In the messy pile of rocks, there was a door shining with golden light. It was intact. Without a doubt, that was the entrance to the grotto heaven and blessed lands. After the ruins were completely destroyed, the entrance to the divine array was revealed. As for the 1,000 soldiers of the heaven-conquering army who were guarding the entrance, as well as the 24 captains of the heaven-conquering army, they had all disappeared. The pit was littered with corpses and broken pieces of weapons and armor. It was obvious what had happened to the Heaven Punishers and the golden-armored martial gods. As for Ji Tianxing and the others, they were standing above the pit. There were still 4 people and 4 divine beasts. Not a single one was missing. Seeing this, the dozens of alien martial gods and explorers were all shocked. They widened their eyes in shock. No one could believe that the outcome of the battle would be like this. 4 people and 4 beasts, against more than 1,000 Heaven Punishers, were actually able to annihilate all of them while their own side remained unscathed. The word, powerful, was not enough to describe the terrifying combat strength of Ji Tianxing and the others. Pervert. Monster. Terrifying. Unbelievable. Who are those experts? How can he be so powerful? If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it even if you beat me to death. The martial gods and explorers in the various teams all exclaimed and discussed. At this time, Ji Tianxing and the others landed in the deep pit and stepped into the golden door one after another. Swoosh, whoosh, swish. Several golden lights flashed, and the figures of the 4 people and the 4 divine beasts disappeared. Silence returned to the valley. The dozens of martial gods and explorers finally came to their senses. After a moment of hesitation, one of the teams took the lead and flew into the deep pit, entering the golden light gate one after another. With someone taking the lead, there were immediately others who followed suit. The other teams were afraid that they would fall behind and lose the initiative, so they all entered the light door one after another. As the golden light flashed, Ji Tianxing and the others arrived at an alternate dimension. The dimension was vast and had a radius of at least 100,000 miles. Unlike the dilapidated and decaying scene on the divine planet, this dimension was very well preserved. The vast expanse of land was covered with green grasslands, flowers and fruits. In the distance there was a vast mountain range, which revealed a hazy outline under the golden light. The air was filled with extremely rich divine power, which even condensed into gold and silver light ribbons that floated in the sky. High in the sky there were 2 huge stars hanging. One was golden like the scorching sun. The other was silver like the bright moon. At this time the bright moon's light was dim, and the scorching sun's golden light illuminated the entire dimension. Without a doubt it was daytime in this dimension. Ji Tianxing and the others could see that the 2 stars high in the sky were real. A powerful deity had used his supreme divine power to move 2 stars and imitate the sun and the moon. Such abundant divine power. As expected of a blessed place. The cultivation resources here are really abundant to the extreme. Even a pig can become a deity after living here for a few thousand years, right? Look, the flowers and fruits in the grasslands and forest are all divine herbs and fruits. Unfortunately, the Heaven Punishers and those space pirates have already ransacked this place. The flowers and fruits in the grasslands and forest are the leftovers they collected. Their quality and effects are lower. The truly rare herbs and divine items have probably been taken by them. Everyone observed the situation around them and discussed angrily. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and comforted everyone. Don't worry, the divine items that the East Conquering Marshal and the space pirates have taken will be spat out soon. With that, he led by Long Ji Wuhan Ji Wushuang and the 4 divine beasts toward the mountain range in the distance. The group flew over the grasslands. They had just flown a few hundred miles when an angry roar filled with murderous intent came from the side. Who dares to trespass into the forbidden area? You must be tired of living. Ji Tianxing and the others turned their heads and saw 5 Heaven Punishers in golden armor leading more than 400 black-armored warriors flying toward them at lightning speed. 4 of the Heaven Punishers were only LV4 or LV5 martial gods. Apparently they were captains. The leader of the gold-armored martial gods had reached LV9 martial god realm. He was most likely the general of the fleet. Swoosh, swoosh. After a few breaths, the 5 gold-armored martial gods had arrived. The leader of the gold-armored martial gods waved his hand and more than 400 black-armored warriors surrounded Ji Tianxing and the others. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing and the others were not angry or worried. Instead they smiled playfully. It seems that the East Conquering Marshal has already taken over this grotto and sent people to search for divine items. Bai Long sneered with a mocking expression. Ji Tianxing said calmly, "Spare the gold-armored martial god and kill the others." Bai Long immediately nodded and said, "Yes, sir." Then his body shone with white light and turned into a 1,000-foot-long white dragon shadow that charged toward the crowd. Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang and the 4 divine beasts also attacked. They performed their super skills and attacked the surrounding soldiers. The 5 heaven punishers were stunned. Their faces were filled with astonishment. They had wanted to interrogate Ji Tianxing and the others about how they had broken into this grotto. However, they had not expected that they would dare to attack first when they were so few in number and surrounded. They were simply courting death. Furious, the 5 heaven punishers took out their sabers, swords and halberds and performed their super skills to counterattack. In the next moment a great battle broke out. Ji Tianxing and the others performed their super skills and killed more than 100 black-armored warriors in an instant. The 5 heaven punishers' faces changed drastically and their eyes widened in shock. Chapter 2674. When the 5 heaven-seeking martial gods came back to their senses, Ji Tianxing and the others unleashed another wave of divine light. Swish, swish. The 5 heaven-conquering martial gods sensed the destructive power. Their expressions changed drastically as they dodged and blocked the attack in fear. Boom, 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 boom. Divine skills clashed with the 5-colored light. A series of earth-shattering booms echoed in the sky. The battle only lasted for a few breaths before it ended. The ground within 300 miles had been turned into ruins. Only a giant pit was left. The 4 captains were smashed into pieces, killed by Ji Tianxing, Bai Long and the others. The general in golden armor had also been severely injured. He lay in the ruins, covered in blood and twitching. Swish. With a flash, Bai Long landed in the ruins. He waved his hand and shot out a beam of white light to seal the general in golden armor. He carried the general in golden armor who had lost an arm and a leg and flew back to Ji Tianxing. Master, I did as you asked. I kept him alive. Ji Tianxing nodded and waved his hand. Bai Long retreated to the side. He didn't waste time. He didn't even interrogate the general in golden armor. He used the soul-searching divine skill and started to search the general in golden armor's memory. The heaven punishers were very special. Their bodies and strength were very strong and their vitality was very strong. In terms of combat power and vitality, they were stronger than the demons and more difficult to deal with. However, because of their race, they didn't cultivate divine soul power. Therefore, the divine soul power of the heaven punishers was very ordinary. Ji Tianxing easily obtained the general in golden armor's memory. A moment later, he withdrew his palms that were flickering with golden light, and the corner of his mouth curled up into a faint smile. The general in golden armor's divine soul had been forcefully extracted. He fainted on the spot. Bai Long used his eyes to ask for permission from Ji Tianxing. After getting permission, he killed the general in golden armor. Boom! The general in golden armor was smashed into pieces. He turned into a rain of blood and fell on the ruins. Follow me. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and led everyone to the east. Everyone flew across the sky as fast as lightning, crossing over the green grassland, mountain range and 2 mirror-like lakes. Ji Wushuang couldn't hold back the doubts in his heart. He looked at Ji Tianxing a few times and finally couldn't help but ask, "Father, where are we going? You already know the location of the Eastern Marshal?" Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said, "Marshal Zhendong is leading over 100 captains to search for divine items and resources in the godly palace in the middle of the grotto heaven 30,000 miles away. In addition, there are more than 50 captains leading more than 10,000 soldiers to search for divine items in this grotto heaven." Ji Wushuang, Ji Wuhan, and Bai Long immediately revealed astonished expressions. The East-conquering marshal actually brought so many heaven punishers with him? With so many heaven punishers, it's enough to occupy the entire grotto heaven. If we go directly to the East-conquering marshal and fight them head-on, I'm afraid we'll be at a disadvantage. Ji Tianxing smiled and said, when the East-conquering marshal entered the divine planet, he gathered a total of more than 260 captains and more than 20,000 soldiers. There were more than 60 captains leading 6,000 soldiers of the heavenly expedition who were still searching for treasures on the divine planet. When they entered this grotto heaven, the East-conquering marshal brought 200 captains and 20,000 soldiers. However, there were 2 pirate groups and 8 adventurer groups that had entered the grotto heaven earlier than them. The East-conquering marshal wanted to monopolize this grotto heaven, so he annihilated the 2 pirate groups and the 8 adventurer groups. During the battle, more than 50 captains and more than 6,000 soldiers were killed by the space pirates and adventurers. Ji Wuhan frowned and said with a grave expression, "Father, even so, there are still more than 150 captains and more than 10,000 soldiers in this grotto heaven. We can't fight the East-conquering marshal head-on. We can only think of ways to kill them in batches." Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "That's right. Father has the same idea." And now it was the best opportunity. In the temple in the middle of the grotto heaven, there is an ancient divine beast guarding the temple and an old man in a black robe. The old man and the divine beast are both celestial god realm deities. However, they are seriously injured and their strength has dropped greatly, but they are still stubbornly resisting. The East-conquering marshal and hundreds of captains are besieging the old man and the divine beast. They have already spent a month, but they still haven't succeeded in killing them. Suddenly hearing this news, everyone's eyes lit up, revealing a look of surprise and anticipation. The divine planet is broken. Half of the planet has turned into ruins. Even the corpses of the deities can't be found. There are still deities and divine beasts in this grotto heaven that survived? Celestial god realm deities and divine beasts? Even if they are seriously injured, their strength is still terrifying. The East-conquering marshal is in trouble. This is indeed an excellent opportunity for us. Let's hurry over and help as soon as possible. We can definitely kill the East-conquering marshal with a pincer attack. 45 minutes later, the group flew for 30,000 miles and arrived in the middle of a vast and majestic mountain range. There were tall mountains in all directions and the mountain ranges crisscrossed. It was a vast and majestic scene. The mountain range was filled with divine power, and all the peaks were enveloped by 5-colored divine light. The endless mountain range was filled with all kinds of exotic flowers and herbs. They were all divine-level resources and treasures. In the middle of the mountain range, there was a giant mountain that was 30,000 feet tall and 800 miles wide. It stood between the heavens and the earth. The mountain's aura was majestic and it connected the heavens and the earth. Half of the mountain was enveloped by 5-colored divine light, and it was exceptionally sacred and dazzling. Everyone could tell at a glance that this sacred mountain was the core of the grotto heaven. At the same time, it was also where the divine range within 100,000 miles was located. It was a treasure land with the most divine power. However, the giant mountain had been ravaged by the battle of the deities, and cracks had already appeared on the mountain. The mountain's waist had collapsed and countless rocks and stones were piled up at the foot of the mountain. The group stood above the giant mountain. Their vision was blocked by the 5-colored divine light, and they could not see the mountain's peak clearly. However, there were still rumbling noises mixed with the shouts of the heaven punishers echoing in the air. There were also earth-shattering roars of beasts, loud bangs of divine techniques clashing and explosions. The violent shockwaves formed many 5-colored hurricanes that spread in all directions. Even so, the shockwaves could not blow away the 5-colored divine light around the mountain. Within a radius of 1,000 miles, it was a scene of colorful splendor. Such a huge battle proved that Ji Tianxing's words were true. The East-conquering marshal and hundreds of heaven punishers were still besieging the deity elder and the guardian divine beast. Since the battle between the two sides had not ended, it was easy to handle. Everyone hurriedly released their divine senses. They penetrated the thick 5-colored divine light and probed the towering mountain's peak. Soon, everyone saw the situation at the mountain's peak and the situation of the battle. Chapter 2675. The mountain peak within a radius of 300 miles looked as if it had been sliced by a knife. It was very flat. In the middle was a magnificent, majestic, and dignified palace. More than 100 palaces of different sizes formed an incomparably sacred heavenly eagle shrine. Even though the palace was protected by a divine array within a radius of 100 miles. However, the enormous divine light shield had long been riddled with cracks and holes. That was a heavenly god-level array. It was definitely not something that Marshal Zhendong and the others could break through. Ji Tianxing knew at a glance that it was caused by the collapse of the divine star. Within the divine light shield, hundreds of palaces were dimmed. Most of them had collapsed, leaving behind many broken walls. Only the most magnificent and majestic main palace in the middle was relatively well preserved. In front of the palace was a huge square with a radius of 100 miles. The square was paved with golden bricks and decorated with billions of silver star stones. The ground was covered with gold and silver. It was majestic. Such a spacious square was enough for hundreds of thousands of believers to kneel and worship at the same time. However, the battle that had lasted for more than a month had already destroyed the square. The ground was shattered, leaving behind dozens of huge holes. The gold and silver bricks had turned into debris and were scattered in the ruins. In the middle of the square stood a golden statue that was 10,000 feet tall. The huge statue was carved of deity King Heavenly Eagle. However, the statue had long been shattered into pieces. It had turned into golden gravel and was buried in the ruins with the soil. As for the back of the palace, it was a garden built by the deities. Countless rare flowers and herbs were planted there. However, when the divine star had collapsed, the palace had also been attacked and affected by the flames of war. The 4 beautiful gardens had also turned into ruins. All kinds of rare and beautiful flowers and divine trees had been destroyed or burned to ashes. Only broken flowers and withered leaves were left on the ground. They mixed with the ashes and soil, telling the story of endless desolation and destruction. At the same time, the battle was still ongoing. More than 100 heaven-slaying martial gods in golden armor were scattered around the godly palace, forming a huge encirclement. They were arranged according to the position of the array. They worked together to form a battle array. They advanced and retreated together. Even though they were only at the martial god realm, the power of the divine skill they cast together was comparable to 3 or 4 peak true god realm experts. In the air above the square, there was a tall man wearing black armor and a golden cape. The purple-colored man who looked like a lion man had the strength of a 6th-level true god. He had a head full of curly purple hair, and he held 2 3-meter-long divine sabers in his hands. He cast spells in an awe-inspiring manner and commanded the 100 martial gods to attack. Without a doubt, he was the leader of the Eastern Expedition Fleet, the overlord of the Green Sun Galaxy, the Eastern Expedition Marshal. Under his command, the hundreds of golden-armored captains were in high spirits. Everyone attacked from time to time, releasing purple light pillars that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, blasting towards the divine palace within the divine light barrier. From time to time, they would join hands to defend, using all kinds of light pillars and barriers to resist the counterattacks of the divine beasts and deities. Everyone had an abundance of resources and could continuously replenish their divine power. Even though the battle had been going on for more than a month, the captains did not seem tired or slack off. The old deity hiding in the divine palace and the huge guardian divine beast were at the end of their rope. They were severely injured. The guardian divine beast was more than 300 feet tall. It was a dark golden divine elephant. However, its appearance was different from an ordinary elephant. Not only did it have 6 thick legs, but it also had 4 long and sharp tusks. Moreover, its body was covered in armor that looked like dragon scales, and it had 4 wide wings under its ribs. Even though its strength had reached the heavenly god realm, it was severely injured. However, its injuries were too severe. Not only were 3 of its legs broken, 2 of its wings were shattered, and even 3 of its 4 tusks were broken. Its body, which was as large as a mountain, was also covered in bloody grooves and holes, revealing its golden divine bones. The huge eye had also turned into an empty bloody hole. The eyeball had disappeared. Its body was on the verge of collapse, and its divine power was extremely weak. Its divine soul was also in a mess. It could not hold on any longer and fall unconscious. Even so, it still stubbornly held on. It opened its bloody mouth, waved its huge trunk and lifted its mountain-like feet. It released golden divine light and attacked the deities around it. In the face of everyone's light beams and divine spells, it did its best to defend. When it could not dodge the attacks, it used its mountain-like body to block them. What angered and frustrated it the most was that the attacks of the deities never stopped. It did not have time to heal its injuries or recover its divine power. Ji Tianxing could see that this divine elephant was not a pure-blooded ancient divine elephant. It should be a subspecies of the divine elephant, so its talent and power were limited. Simply put, it could be the bloodline of the ancient divine elephant and other divine beasts. What a pity! If it was a pure-blooded ancient divine elephant, not only would it have endless divine power, but its defense would also be almost invincible. Even if it was severely injured and weakened, the deities would not be able to defeat it. Ji Tianxing looked calmly at the dark golden divine elephant and sighed regretfully. However, he also knew that there were very few pure-blooded ancient divine elephants. Even when he was in the god realm, he had only seen a few. They were as rare as divine dragons, phoenixes and cheilants. Moreover, as time passed, there would be fewer and fewer divine beasts until they disappeared completely. This was very common in the countless years since the ancient times. Many divine beasts and mutated beasts that had existed since the ancient times had disappeared in the river of time. At this moment, more than 100 deities attacked together. They released hundreds of purple light pillars and sword radiances toward the dark golden divine elephant. The light pillars and sword radiances passed through the cracks and holes in the divine light shield and drowned the dark golden divine elephant. The dark golden divine elephant hurriedly used spells to defend itself. It released dozens of golden light shields to protect itself. On its broad and sturdy back stood an old man with white hair and a beard and a black robe. Although the elder was old, his body was tall and straight. His face was still fair and handsome. He had a pair of blue eyes, a pair of elf-like pointy ears and a whirlpool-like mark on his forehead. Ji Tianxing, of course, recognized that the elder in the black robe was from the Ling clan. In the vast god realm, the Ling clan was one of the most common and most populous clans. The Ling clan was born with a dharma body. Their bodies were transparent and free of impurities. They were most compatible with spiritual qi, dharma power and divine power. Moreover, the Ling clan's bodies were slender and strong. They were elegant and noble, and their faces were delicate and delicate. In the eyes of most clans, the Ling clan members were all handsome and beautiful. There were no ugly people. At the same time, the Ling clan was best at setting up formations and casting spells. Close combat was their weakness. Chapter 2676. The spiritual race elder's injuries were also terrible. His black robe was already in tatters and his long blue hair was curled into a ball. His left arm had been cut off, and blood flowed from the wound, revealing the dark blue divine bone. His left calf was also gone and there was nothing under his black robe. His chest, back and shoulders were covered in wounds and bloody holes. His internal organs and bones were clearly visible. Most of the wounds were old. Only a few wounds had been added in the past month. Ji Tianxing could roughly guess. When the divine star had collapsed, the spiritual race elder and the dark gold divine elephant had been on the verge of death. They had luckily managed to survive. They were hiding in the blessed enclave, hiding in the divine palace and living an ignoble existence. If they had been given a few hundred years, they would have been able to use the divine items and resources in the grotto heaven to heal their injuries and return to their peak strength. Unfortunately, a large group of adventurers, pirates, and the heaven punishers had charged in not long after they had secluded themselves to heal. In the end, this was the result. The spiritual race elder and the dark gold divine elephant were trapped in the temple. They could only endure the attacks of the heaven punishers and could not escape. Boom, boom, boom. The divine arts of the spiritual race elder and the dark gold divine elephant clashed with the purple light in the sky, creating deafening booms. A destructive shockwave exploded within the divine light shield and spread out in all directions. More than half of the palaces that had cracks on them were swaying left and right from the impact. The spiritual race elder and the dark gold divine elephant's injuries had worsened, and they were even weaker now. However, the heaven punishers around the temple were unharmed and still full of divine power. They worked together to cast a spell and prepare for the next attack. Bai Long, Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang all had worried expressions. The four divine beasts also had grave expressions as they used their divine senses to observe the battle on the mountain peak. Seeing the situation of the spiritual race elder and the dark gold divine elephant, Ji Wushuang could not bear to see them in such a state. He asked, "Father, when should we attack? If we delay any longer, I'm afraid that spiritual race elder and that divine elephant will die very soon." Ji Tianxing slightly nodded and said, "Now is the best time to strike. But you must remember that you must not linger in the fight lest you get surrounded. Only when we seize the initiative can we nibble away at the martial gods under martial Zhendong." Everyone spread out and attacked. First they would hold back the Heaven Punishers. Then they would find a chance to save the Spirit Clan Elder and the Divine Elephant. Xianxia and Yaya followed me to attack from the front, while Bai Long steered the warship to attack from the east. Qian Yu and Lu Li are in charge of the west, Black Dragon and Lan Kun are in charge of the north. Ji Tianqing quickly arranged everything. Everyone replied in unison and began to move. White Dragon piloted the Tianqing battleship and flew to the east of the temple. He opened up the divine cannons and began firing. Boom 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 boom. More than 100 black divine cannons fired golden light beams that covered the sky and the earth, pouring down on martial god Fa who was near the godly palace. Qian Yu and the glazed fiery dragon flew to the west side of the godly palace and unleashed icy light and golden flames that engulfed more than 20 martial gods. Black Dragon and Blue Kun flew to the north side of the godly palace and unleashed black water and divine light to attack as well. Ji Tianqing led Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang to attack Martial Zhendong and the martial gods head-on with the Source Stone Divine Sword. An earth-shattering battle immediately broke out. Martial Zhendong had sensed that something was wrong when everyone had reached the peak of the mountain. He had sensed everyone's energy. When Ji Tianqing and the other 3 and the 4 divine beasts attacked separately, Martial Zhendong was very alert and gave the order. Half of the martial gods turned around and unleashed divine spells to attack the 4 divine beasts and Ji Tianqing. The other half continued to attack the spiritual race elder and the divine elephant in the temple. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Ji Tianqing and his 2 sons had just flown to the sky above the square when dozens of purple sword shadows came at them. The 3 of them were enveloped and the space within 100 miles was sealed. It was difficult for them to dodge. However, they had no intention of dodging. They swung their divine swords confidently and used their ultimate sword techniques. Whoosh 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 whoosh. In an instant more than 60 dazzling sword shadows slashed at the purple divine light. With a series of loud noises, the sky full of sword shadows collapsed. The shockwaves spread out in all directions along with countless pieces of divine light. The martial gods quickly dodged. Martial Zhendong was very powerful. He stood in the sky without moving and was not affected at all. Ji Tianqing and his sons were also unharmed and did not retreat at all. Seeing this, Martial Zhendong immediately frowned. A glint of surprise flashed across his eyes. He stared at the 3 of them coldly. After sizing up Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang, he fixed his eyes on Ji Tianqing. After a moment of careful observation, his expression suddenly changed. His eyes shone brightly. You're Ji Tianqing. Martial Zhendong's tone was uncertain. It was also filled with shock and surprise. Many years ago, the great Emperor of Heaven Punishing had issued an order to many marshals and generals. Anyone from the Heaven Punishing tribe who encountered Ji Tianqing was to report to them immediately and try to kill him. Whoever could kill Ji Tianqing would be promoted to Duke Zhendong and be rewarded with a Heaven God weapon and a Heaven God cultivation technique. At the end of the decree there was also a portrait. The person in the portrait was a handsome young man in a white robe with a head full of black hair. His eyes were as bright as stars. His face was extremely handsome and he was in high spirits. The great Emperor of Heaven Punishing's oracle was of great importance. All the marshals and generals who received the oracle would remember the portrait. They did not dare to forget it. Thus, Martial Zhendong had never seen Ji Tianqing before, but he could recognize him very quickly. However, he had never expected that the infamous, evil and cruel Ji Tianqing would appear here. On the dilapidated god planet in a secret blessed land. Martial Zhendong immediately understood. Ji Tianqing. It's you. Must be you. You entered the Green Sun Galaxy for Benshui. That's why you came here. Martial Zhendong held the black saber in his right hand and pointed it at Ji Tianqing. His voice was filled with murderous intent. Ji Tianqing did not deny it. He nodded calmly and said, "That's right. It's good that you understand." Martial Zhendong's eyes grew colder. He licked his lips and said in a low voice, "I heard that you and a divine beast worked together to kill Martial Zhenan. Benshui can see that you are indeed powerful and capable. However, Benshui is not as useless as Zhenan. He died in the small purple cloud galaxy and became the laughing stock of our tribe. Today, Benshui has gathered a large number of troops here. How dare you come here? You're digging your own grave." As he spoke, Martial Zhendong sneered. "You probably don't know that our great emperor has given the oracle. If anyone could kill you, they would be able to achieve a meteoric rise and soar into the sky, enjoying glory, splendor, wealth and power. Benshui must thank you for bringing this great merit to Benshui. Chapter 2677. Marshal Dong had cultivated for 6,000 years to reach his current level of strength. He had spent his entire life fighting for the heaven-slaying tribe to expand their territory and reach his current status. Ever since he had reached LV6 True God Realm, he had not broken through for 700 years. He knew that without a great opportunity, it would be difficult for him to increase his strength in the future. As for ascending to the upper realm and reaching the heaven god realm, he did not even dare to think about it. Ji Tianxing, who was standing in front of him, was his greatest opportunity. If he could kill Suemo, he would be able to obtain great wealth. He would even have the chance to increase his strength and reach the heaven god realm. Marshal Dong felt his blood boil at the thought of this. He was so excited that his body trembled. Although he knew that Ji Tianxing was powerful, he was not weak. However, he wasn't a weakling either. He had over 100 heaven-defying martial gods by his side. No matter what, he could easily kill Ji Tianxing. There would be no accidents. Ji Tianxing's eyes were sharp and vicious. How could he not know what Marshal Dong was thinking? He immediately sneered and said in a mocking tone, "It seems that the heaven-slaying great emperor only told you that you could obtain power and wealth by killing me. He did not tell you that I beat him up and he ran away with serious injuries. If you knew about this, you would not be so optimistic." Marshal Dong felt as if he had been struck by lightning when he heard this. He was petrified. He was so shocked that he was dumbfounded. His body stiffened as he stared at Ji Tianxing. After a while, he came to his senses and shouted instinctively, "Bullsh *T. Ji Tianxing, don't you dare deceive us with your lies. Who do you think our great emperor is? He has reached the limit of the true god realm and is a half-step heaven god. He is invincible in the universe. You're just a lowly human. How dare you compare yourself to our great emperor? Today Benshui will kill you on the spot and expose your ridiculous lies." Marshal Dong naturally hadn't heard of this and didn't believe Ji Tianxing's words. Even if he had some doubts in his heart, he had to show contempt and disdain and deny this matter. Otherwise, great Emperor Tian Fa would be utterly humiliated. While roaring, the east-conquering marshal wielded his pair of blades with a murderous aura, hacking down towards Ji Tianxing. Swoosh, swish. The dazzling purple blade of light locked onto Ji Tianxing's divine sense and slashed toward him with the power to split heaven and earth. He couldn't dodge, so he could only try to block or neutralize it. Between heaven and earth, a murderous aura suddenly surged and purple light filled the sky. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, looked indifferent. He casually swung the barrier of heaven. Shua. A dazzling golden sword projection over 10,000 feet in length swept through the air with boundless divine might before striking the two purple light blades head-on. With two loud bangs, the two purple light blades collapsed on the spot, turning into fragments that scattered all over the sky. However, the golden sword light was still intact, and its power did not decrease as it slashed towards Marshal Zhendong. Marshal Zhendong's face suddenly changed. His eyes flashed with a strong sense of surprise, and he subconsciously waved his two swords to slash. Bang! With a muffled sound, the dazzling golden sword light was shattered, and golden fragments scattered all over the sky. However, Marshal Zhendong was knocked back by the impact. He tumbled and crashed into the crowd 10 miles away. More than a dozen martial gods exclaimed as they hurried over to catch Marshal Zhendong. Bang! Bang! The violent impact caused everyone to be thrown off their feet and thrown off their feet. Marshal Zhendong didn't even have time to tidy up his clothes. He roared angrily, "You bastards, what are you waiting for? Kill him for Benshui." The dozen martial gods came back to their senses and answered in unison. They swung their swords at Ji Tianxing. At the same time, Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang also swung their divine swords and slashed out overwhelming sword light. One sword light chills 19 states. Moonless mystic light sword. It was as if a beam of sword light had come from the sky. It carried a brilliant divine might and slashed into the crowd with a force that could split open the sky. Ji Wushuang unleashed 18 crescent-shaped sword lights that enveloped more than a dozen martial gods. Her movements were light and elegant, and the sword light was gorgeous. It was quite pleasing to the eye. However, the sword technique was extremely powerful. After a series of muffled noises, The dozen or so martial gods were knocked back. A few of them were not injured, but the other dozen martial gods were in trouble. Not only were their armors cracked, but there were also hideous wounds on their bodies. Purple blood spurted out. Some of them were in the worst condition. Their limbs were chopped off. Two of the martial gods were standing at the front. They were chopped into pieces by the sword light and died on the spot. Marshal Zhendong's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He was both furious and shocked. He simply couldn't believe it. It was one thing for Ji Tianqing to be so powerful, but even the two children beside him had such terrifying combat strength. At this moment he finally understood why Ji Tianqing dared to come here. Marshal Zhendong's confidence started to crumble. A hint of worry appeared in his heart. He had a bad premonition. It was hard to predict the outcome of this battle. However, at this point he would not be afraid or back down. He swung his two swords again and charged at Ji Tianqing. Sky-shattering strike. Marshal Zhendong shouted angrily. He swung his two swords and unleashed hundreds of purple light beams that charged at Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing put his left hand behind his back. He swung the Burial of Heaven sword with his right hand and counterattacked calmly. Sun-shattering sword. The Burial of Heaven sword stabbed out 36 times in an instant and hit the hundreds of purple light beams. Crack, crack, crack. In the blink of an eye, the hundreds of purple light beams collapsed. There were still 24 golden sword lights left, but they were still powerful. They enveloped Marshal Zhendong. Bang, bang, bang. With a series of muffled sounds, Marshal Zhendong was hit 24 times. He screamed and flew back. The black armor and golden cloak he was wearing had been torn apart by the sword light. A dozen bone-deep wounds were left on his dark purple body. Blood gushed out. Marshal Zhendong flew back for more than 10 miles and crashed into the crowd. The few captains in golden armor who were casting spells to attack the spirit tribe elder and the divine elephant immediately staggered and cried out in surprise. Marshal Zhendong was extremely embarrassed and angry. He hurriedly got up and rushed towards Ji Tianqing without thinking about his own safety. This was the second time he was sent flying. Nothing could be done more than 3 times. This time he used all his strength and his trump card. He would not be defeated by Ji Tianqing again. World slaughter. The East-conquering marshal roared. He held 2 long swords with both hands and slashed down at Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing stood still and punched with his left hand. Dragon Elephant Fist. A mountain-sized dragon elephant fist shadow blasted out with terrifying divine might. Boom. With a muffled sound, Marshal Zhendong was sent flying again. Before he landed in the crowd, Ji Tianqing swung the Burial of Heaven sword with his right hand and stabbed out a dazzling cold light. Whoosh. The cold light flashed in the sky. The next moment, the cold light appeared more than 10 miles away and exploded on Marshal Zhendong's chest. Chapter 2678. Boom. There was a muffled explosion. The armor worn by Marshal Zhendong was blown to pieces, turning into thousands of pieces and splashing everywhere. A huge bloody hole was blown out of his chest and a large chunk of flesh and bones mixed with blood flew out. His internal organs were all minced and blasted by the sword light. Marshal Dong didn't die even though his body was severely injured. He let out a piercing scream. Ah! His body twitched in pain. His murderous intent turned into crimson flames that soared into the sky. Ji Tianqing, Ben Shuayan, you are irreconcilable. Marshal Dong roared hysterically. His voice was trembling, hoarse, and filled with grief and anger. Even though he was furious, he didn't lose his mind. He immediately ordered the martial gods next to him. Ben Shuai, stop. Attack Ji Tianqing with all your strength. No matter the cost, we must kill him. More than a dozen martial gods were working together to attack the spiritual tribe elder and the divine elephant in the temple. After receiving Marshal Zhendong's order, they all turned around and charged towards Ji Tianqing without fear of death. In the blink of an eye, Ji Tianqing was surrounded by many golden-armored captains. Not far away, Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang were also surrounded by more than a dozen golden-armored captains. Marshal Dong took the opportunity to take out his battleship. He entered the true god-level battleship and started to bombard Ji Tianqing. The two sides fought in the sky, releasing godly light that covered the sky and formed brilliant shadows. It was difficult to determine the winner in a short time. However, the spiritual elder and the divine elephant in the temple were under less pressure. Only 30 or so martial gods were still able to attack them. The remaining 60 or so people were besieging and resisting Ji Tianxing's group, as well as the 4 divine beasts. Someone came to save us? The divine elephant said to the spiritual elder while blocking the attacks of the captains. The old man from the spirit tribe methodically launched a counterattack and replied, "We are citizens of the divine realm and this is the mortal world. Why would anyone come to save us? It was just a battle of interests, a dogfight. But no matter what, this is good news for us." Even though the statue and the spirit clan elder were like arrows at the end of their flight, they were like lamps that had run out of oil. However, they remained calm and collected. They were neither angry nor surprised. The divine elephant tried to attack, trying to break through the encirclement of the many martial gods and escape from the godly palace. Unfortunately, its injuries were too severe and it was already powerless. He tried 3 times in a row, but all of them ended in failure. He was beaten back by the heaven-seeking martial gods. Originally, this was a good opportunity. Unfortunately, we can no longer escape. The divine elephant transmitted his voice, sounding a little helpless and regretful. The old man from the spirit race said calmly, "His Excellency the Divine King has long since fallen, and the Divine Star has also been destroyed. We should have died in that war with the other god kings a long time ago. To be able to survive until now was already a blessing from the heavens. Since he couldn't escape, he might as well accept his death. However, we are heavenly gods. How can we die for nothing?" The divine elephant and the old man from the spirit race had been together for tens of thousands of years. They had a tacit understanding of each other. It immediately understood what the old man from the spirit race meant. It nodded and said, "If that is the case, then let's drag more people down with us. At least we won't be lonely on the road to hell." The old man from the spirit race nodded and didn't say anything else. He started to wave his hands to cast spells. His body was covered in golden flames, which were as dazzling as a torch. The divine elephant silently endured the attacks of the heaven-seeking martial gods. It also used its last trump card, which gave off dazzling divine light. Whoosh! Destructive ripples of divine power exploded from the bodies of the old man from the spirit race and the divine elephant, shaking the world. Their bodies swelled violently, and a divine might that could destroy the heavens and earth was brewing in their bodies. 100 miles away, Ji Tianxing was fighting fiercely with the east-conquering marshal. Suddenly he sensed the ripples of divine power in the godly palace. He immediately frowned and a solemn look flashed past his eyes. Self-destruct? They clearly had a chance to survive and I was about to save them. Why did they self-destruct? Ji Tianxing knew very well. Even if the old man from the spirit race and the divine elephant were exhausted, the power of their self-destruction wouldn't be too strong. However, they were heavenly gods after all. They had already formed divine Tao laws and created godhoods. The power of their godhoods exploding could destroy everything within a few thousand miles. All living beings below the heavenly god realm could be killed. Unless they could get away from the center of the explosion. It was getting better and better. When this thought flashed past his mind, Ji Tianxing retreated without hesitation, ignoring the pursuit of the east-conquering marshal. Whoosh! He moved 50 miles in a flash and rushed into the crowd. He pulled Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang and teleported away. At the same time, he didn't forget to use his divine sense to inform Bai Long, Qian Yu, Black Dragon, Lu Li, and Lan Kuan. Bai Long and the 4 divine beasts also stopped fighting and retreated as fast as they could after receiving the news. The heaven-seeking martial gods who were fighting fiercely with them were shocked. They didn't understand what was going on. Even the east-conquering marshal was confused. He couldn't help but mutter, "Ji Tianxing, that bastard. He clearly has the upper hand. Why did he suddenly run away?" Indeed. In the battle just now, Ji Tianxing and his 2 sons had killed more than 20 golden-armored captains. Now there were only a dozen golden-armored captains next to the east-conquering marshal, and they were all badly injured. Even the east-conquering marshal was badly injured. Not only did he have a huge bloody hole in his chest, but his legs were also cut off. The wound on his waist almost cut him in half. Of course, the east-conquering marshal wasn't stupid. He immediately realized that there must be a reason why Ji Tianxing suddenly ran away when he had the upper hand. He immediately turned around and looked inside the divine light shield. His eyes locked onto the divine elephant and the black-robed elder of the spiritual tribe in the ruins of the temple. He saw that the mountain-like divine elephant had expanded by 3 times. Its body was shining with golden light. The black-robed elder's body also expanded. Golden flames were burning all over his body. Their auras were extremely violent and chaotic. They were on the verge of exploding. However, the 30 heaven-seeking martial gods didn't know what was going on. Without the East-conquering marshal's order, they didn't dare to stop attacking. They were still attacking the spiritual tribe elder and the divine elephant. Seeing this, the East-conquering marshal's expression changed drastically. His body stiffened. He instantly realized that the spiritual tribe elder and the divine elephant were going to self-destruct. It's over. The East-conquering marshal's eyes were filled with grief, anger, and despair. Damn Ji Tianxing. You lowly bastard. If you hadn't interfered, that divine beast and the black-robed elder wouldn't have had the chance to self-destruct. Unfortunately, it had come to this. No matter how angry the East-conquering marshal was, there was nothing he could do. Retreat. Everyone retreat at once. He roared at the top of his lungs. At the same time, he used his fastest speed to teleport and escape into the distance. However, as soon as he fled 100 miles away, an earth-shattering explosion erupted from the divine palace, reverberating throughout the universe. Chapter 2679. Boom. An earth-shattering explosion reverberated through the entire grotto heaven and blessed land. The spiritual tribe elder and the divine elephant self-destructed at the same time. Their bodies instantly disappeared and turned into boundless golden divine light that spread in all directions. The dazzling golden divine light had the power to destroy the world. In an instant, the temple within a 100-mile radius was flattened to the ground. The palaces, buildings, and high walls were all turned to dust. Only a giant pit was left on the spot, along with countless rocks and dust. The divine light shield, which was already in tatters, also dissipated in an instant. Then a golden divine light that could destroy heaven and earth engulfed the entire mountain peak like flames. Everything within a few hundred miles was drowned by the divine light. The first to be annihilated were the dozens of gold-armored captains who couldn't escape in time. Even though they were full of divine power, had divine armors, and used shields to block the golden divine light. But it was useless. Under the golden divine light, the dozens of gold-armored captains were crushed on the spot and turned into dust. Then the golden divine light caught up with Marshal Dong, who was fleeing in panic. Swoosh. The divine light swept past. His body, which was full of wounds and bloody holes, quickly melted like snow under the hot sun. After all, he was only at the 6th level of the true immortal realm and had been severely injured by Ji Tianxing, so he was weak. Also, he was only 100 miles away from the center of the explosion, so he had to withstand a lot of power. In the blink of an eye, he completely disappeared without a trace. Marshal Dong had never thought that he would die on this broken star after fighting in the universe all his life. Moreover, he had died in such an obscure way, ending his rather glorious life. The next moment, the golden divine light spread for 500 miles, past the mountain peak and rushed into the sky. Lan Kuan had only escaped 600 miles when it was engulfed by the golden divine light. Swoosh. As the golden divine light swept past, countless cracks appeared on its body, and blood spurted out, revealing its white bones. The incomparably powerful divine power knocked it unconscious, and it fell from the sky and smashed into the ground. Then Qian Yu, the black dragon, and the glazed fire dragon who had escaped 700 miles away were also engulfed by the golden divine light. When the golden divine light reached this place, its power had already weakened somewhat. The 3 divine beasts were severely injured and fell to the ground with blood all over their bodies. However, they were still able to maintain their consciousness and did not fall unconscious. White Dragon, who had escaped 800 miles away, was protected by Tianxing's battleship. Even though it was engulfed by the golden divine light, the Tianxing battleship was unscathed, and so was the White Dragon. Only after Ji Tianxing had fled 1,000 miles away with the 2 children did the golden divine light catch up to them. He was already prepared and brought the 2 children into the sword world. Shua. The golden divine light swept across and struck the Burial of Heaven sword, blasting the Burial of Heaven sword several dozen kilometers away. However, the Burial of Heaven sword was made of a special material and was not damaged. Ji Tianxing and his 2 sons were also safe and sound. After a short while, the golden divine light spread to a radius of 4,000 miles before its power was greatly reduced, and it gradually dissipated. This apocalyptic disaster finally came to an end. As far as the eye could see, there was scorched earth and ruins within a radius of 4,000 miles. The towering mountain that was 3,000 feet tall had already collapsed, and endless earth and rocks had collapsed. The surrounding mountains and forests were also in ruins. The storm finally stopped. The spirit clan elder and the divine elephant had completely disappeared. Marshal Zhendong and the hundreds of golden-armored captains under his command were also not spared. They were all smashed to pieces. Only Ji Tianxing and the others survived. Shua. Ji Tianxing flew out of the burial of Heaven's sword with the two children and appeared in the sky. He looked around and saw that the 4 divine beasts were lying on the ground, covered in blood and in a sorry state. He then flew back. White Dragon also drove the battleship to rescue Lan Kuan. After a while, Ji Tianxing, White Dragon and the others rescued the 4 divine beasts. Everyone gathered together and quickly checked the 4 divine beasts' injuries. White Dragon found the results and said worriedly, "Master, Lan Kuan's injuries are the most serious. He's already unconscious. Qian Yu, Black Dragon and Azure are also seriously injured, but they can still stay awake." Then he cursed angrily, "That divine elephant and the spirit clan elder really don't know what's good for them. We went to rescue them with good intentions, but they didn't want to live. They actually self-destructed. In the end, they caused us to be in such a miserable state." Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said regretfully, "That spirit clan elder and the divine elephant probably gave up hope long ago. That's why they self-destructed to end all of this." Although Qian Yu, Black Dragon, Lan Kuan and Azure were all seriously injured. Marshal Zhendong and the hundreds of captains under his command were also killed on the spot. This way it saved us a lot of trouble. Only then did White Dragon's anger dissipate. He nodded and said, "That's right. If it weren't for the spirit clan elder and the divine elephant, we would have to pay a heavy price to kill Marshal Zhendong and the hundreds of captains." Ji Tianxing instructed, "Don't worry. When they return to the divine pagoda, they will be able to recover after 100 years of seclusion. Take them into the sword world first and help them heal their injuries. I want to take Qinchin and Yaya to kill the other members of the Heaven Punisher." Ji Tianxing never forgot that there were more than 40 captains and more than 10,000 soldiers of the Heaven Punisher in the Blessed Enclave. They were searching everywhere for divine items. The White Dragon also remembered this matter and did not hesitate to say yes. Then he took the 4 divine beasts into the sword world to heal their injuries. Ji Tianxing, Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang stayed in the sky above the ruins and waited quietly. Ji Wushuang waited for a while. Feeling puzzled, he couldn't help but ask, "Father, aren't we going to kill the other members of the Heaven Punisher? Why aren't we moving yet?" Before Ji Tianxing could answer, Ji Wuhan explained, "Father wants to wait. Just now, the spirit clan elder and the divine elephant self-destructed, destroying everything within a radius of 4,000 miles. That huge explosion spread throughout the entire Blessed Enclave. The huge commotion also alarmed everything within 100,000 miles. Soon, the members of the Heaven Punisher who are searching for treasures outside will rush over to check the situation." Ji Wushuang immediately understood and nodded to show that he understood. Just as expected. Half an hour later, a pitch-black warship of the Heaven Punisher sped over from afar. Whoosh! When the warship flew over the ruins, Ji Tianxing suddenly swung the burial of Heaven's sword and fiercely slashed at it. With a huge boom, the warship was cut in half. Then Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang attacked at the same time and destroyed the warship that had been cut in half. A golden armor captain and more than 200 soldiers of the Heaven Punisher were also quickly killed by the father and son trio. In just 10 breaths of time, the father and son trio took care of a warship and waited patiently. Soon 2 more warships flew over from afar. When the warships arrived above the ruins, Ji Tianxing swung his sword again and cut the 2 warships in half. Another massacre was about to begin. Chapter 2680. A total of 8 hours passed. Ji Tianxing and his sons had successively destroyed 42 battleships and killed more than 12,000 soldiers of the Heaven-conquering army. The Heaven-conquering army that had been scattered all over the cave and busy searching for resources had basically all rushed over. Even the Heaven-conquering battleships that were at the edge of the cave would be able to arrive in 8 hours. The three of them waited for an hour, but there were no battleships coming. Ji Wushuang asked tentatively, "Father, we've already destroyed 42 battleships. We should have killed them all, right?" Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and shook his head gently. "There should be 5 battleships and more than 1,000 soldiers of the heaven-conquering army. I don't know why they haven't come yet." Ji Wuhan said thoughtfully, "Perhaps those people found some precious divine items or secret realms and were delayed. Or perhaps they encountered some danger and couldn't get away for the time being. There's another possibility. They guessed that something had happened here, so they hid in the dark and didn't dare to show themselves." Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "These are all possibilities, but we don't have time to continue waiting. Let's split up and search the entire cave." There were only 5 battleships and more than 1,000 soldiers of the heaven-conquering army left. The strongest among them was only at the 5th or 6th level of the martial god realm. They were not a threat to Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang. Therefore, Ji Tianxing was not worried about the safety of his 2 children. "All right. We will follow father's orders." Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang cupped their fists and bowed. They each held the Source Stone Divine Sword and turned to leave. One flew to the south and the other flew to the east. The western and northern regions were left to Ji Tianxing alone. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The 3 of them started to move, flying across the sky as fast as lightning. Along the way, the 3 of them used their divine consciousness to search the surroundings, not letting go of any clues. An hour later, Ji Tianxing had searched an area of 40,000 miles and discovered something in the mountain range in the northwest. 3 heaven-conquering battleships and more than 500 heaven-conquering army in black armor had formed a huge encirclement in the sky. 19 martial gods of foreign tribes with different appearances and strange attire were trapped in the encirclement. The 2 sides were fighting fiercely in the mountain range. The sky darkened and the sun and moon dimmed. Dazzling divine light constantly bloomed and shone in the sky. A deafening sound reverberated between heaven and earth. Violent and devastating shockwaves crazily crashed into the surrounding mountains and peaks. Many mountains and forests had been destroyed by the aftermath of the battle, turning into desolate ruins. Ji Tianxing observed for a moment and saw the situation clearly. Even though the 19 foreign race martial gods were not weak and had mastered all kinds of divine powers and secret techniques, they were not weak at all. However, there were too few of them and they could not join forces to attack, nor did they have any warships to use. On the other hand, the 3 captains in golden armor and the more than 500 soldiers of the heaven-conquering army cooperated very well, advancing and retreating in an orderly fashion. The 3 heaven-slicing battleships also floated in the sky and constantly shot out destructive light beams, which put tremendous pressure on the martial gods of the alien tribes. The 19 martial gods of the foreign tribes were seriously injured. If the stalemate continued, their divine power would soon be exhausted. At that time they would be in a passive position and be killed one by the heaven punishers. On the other hand, Ji Tianxing recognized the 19 martial gods. They were the adventurer teams that had followed him into the grotto heaven. Ji Tianxing scanned the area with his divine consciousness and discovered that there were several corpses of martial gods of the alien tribes in the ruined mountain range. At the same time, there were the wreckage of 2 heaven-slicing battleships and the corpses of many heaven-conquering army soldiers. It seems that the 20 or so martial gods of the 4 teams worked together. However, they encountered the heaven-conquering army and were surrounded by 5 heaven-slicing battleships. They could not escape. The 2 sides have been fighting for several hours and 7 martial gods of the alien tribes have already died. 2 heaven-slicing battleships have also been destroyed. More than 400 heaven-conquering army soldiers have also been killed by the martial gods of the alien tribes. Ji Tianxing murmured to himself. Then he took out a communication jade slip and sent a message to Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang. "Xianxia, Yaya, you don't have to search anymore. I have already found 5 heaven-slicing battleships and thousands of heaven-conquering army soldiers." After entering the message, he waved his hand and sent out 2 jade slips. Then he took out the Sword of Burial of Heaven and prepared to destroy the 3 heaven-slicing battleships and kill the heaven-conquering army soldiers. However, after a short 10 breaths, a communication jade slip flew over from afar. Whoosh! With a flash of black light, the jade slip flew over to Ji Tianxing and stopped in front of him. He picked up the jade slip and looked at it. It was a message from Ji Wushuang. His divine consciousness entered the jade slip, and Ji Wushuang's voice sounded in his mind. "Father, I encountered 6 martial gods of the alien tribes and 5 interstellar pirates near a small town in the east. They have teamed up to kill me and steal my treasures. However, father, don't worry. I am dealing with them. They can't do anything to me. Ji Tianxing's eyes narrowed when he saw this message. A cold light flashed in his eyes. Those martial gods of the alien tribes have teamed up with the interstellar pirates? Those damn bastards. If they dare to hurt Yaya, I will make sure they die without a burial place. It was reasonable for the martial gods of the alien tribes and the interstellar pirates to work together and steal treasures from the grotto heaven. Ji Tianxing was not surprised. After all, they were stronger when they worked together and had a chance to steal more divine items. But of all things, they should not have made a move against Ji Wushuang. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the 2 children were Ji Tianxing's reverse scale. Anyone who dared to touch them would die without a complete corpse and be reduced to ashes. Ji Tianxing ignored the heaven-conquering army soldiers and the 19 martial gods of the alien tribes. He turned around and flew away without hesitation. He teleported continuously in the sky and rushed to the east as fast as he could. In just 15 minutes he had traveled more than 40,000 miles. When he flew over a majestic mountain range and was about to reach the vast grassland, he saw a dazzling divine light in the sky ahead. Dazzling multicolored divine spell radiance was accompanied by a series of loud noises. Ji Tianxing quickly sped up and gripped the Burial of Heaven sword tightly in his right hand. In a moment he flew over the grassland and arrived near the battlefield. His divine sense penetrated the divine light in the sky and saw the situation clearly. He saw Ji Wushuang, who was wearing an icy blue dress, waving the source stone divine sword and fending off the attacks of the 7 martial gods. She was covered in an icy blue divine light and was covered by a divine light shield. Other than her messy hair and sweaty forehead, there were no obvious wounds on her body. On the other hand, the 7 martial gods of the alien tribes and the interstellar pirates were mostly injured. Their clothes were ragged and they were covered in blood. Ji Tianxing knew that Ji Wushuang had been fighting with the martial gods for a long time while he was rushing over to rescue her. The 2 sides fought for thousands of miles and 4 martial gods had been killed by Ji Wushuang. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing heaved a sigh of relief and rushed over with his sword. Chapter 2681. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The Burial of Heaven swung his sword, and dozens of dazzling golden sword lights bloomed in the sky. The 7 strangely dressed martial gods did not even have time to dodge before they were enveloped by the sword lights. Bang, bang, bang. A series of muffled explosions rang out. Blood splattered in the golden light as cries of agony rang out. Only a one-eyed pirate managed to dodge the fatal sword lights. The remaining 6 martial gods were struck by the sword lights. Their limbs were severed on the spot and their bodies were even split in half. 4 martial gods were killed instantly. Their body parts fell from the sky and landed on the grassland with a plop. 2 martial gods were severely injured. Their bodies were covered in blood as they retreated in panic. The battle between the 2 sides temporarily stopped. Ji Wushuang turned her head and looked behind her. When she saw that it was Ji Tianxing, she was instantly pleasantly surprised. "Father, why are you here?" Ji Tianxing flew to her side and sized her up. When he saw that she was indeed uninjured, he said, "How can I not worry when you're in such a dangerous situation?" A joyful smile appeared on Ji Wushuang's small face. She nodded and said, "I knew that you would definitely come to save me." At this moment, the 2 surviving martial gods of the foreign tribes met up with the one-eyed pirate. The 3 of them looked sharply at Ji Tianxing. When they saw his face, their expressions changed drastically. "Damn it! It's him. That earth-shattering explosion. How can he still be alive? Damn it! How did he get here so quickly?" It was obvious that the martial gods of the foreign tribes and the interstellar pirates knew that an earth-shattering explosion had occurred in the grotto heaven. They could guess that the explosion had something to do with Ji Tianxing and the Heaven Punishers. They had thought that Ji Tianxing had been killed by the East-conquering Marshal and the Heaven Punishers and had died tragically in the explosion. That was why they had dared to surround and kill Ji Wushuang when they encountered him. However, they had never thought that Ji Tianxing would still be alive and would rush over as quickly as he could. The 2 martial gods and the interstellar space pirate immediately wore twisted expressions. Their eyes were filled with despair. They had seen Ji Tianxing's divine might and knew that Ji Tianxing was a terrifying true god powerhouse. Now that they had fallen into Ji Tianxing's hands, they had no way out. Ji Tianxing looked at the three of them indifferently and said coldly, "Don't wait for me to make a move. Kill yourselves." The three of them stiffened and revealed looks of shame and indignation. They were both humiliated and unwilling. The two martial gods clenched their teeth and shouted coldly in unison, "Sir, we admit that you are powerful, but you want us to kill ourselves? You are too conceited." Obviously, the two of them refused to give up hope and were still hoping to escape. But that one-eyed pirate was very shrewd. He rolled his eyes and came up with an idea. He hurriedly took a few steps forward and with a face full of fear and trepidation he knelt down and kowtowed to Ji Tianxing, saying in a sincere tone, "Senior, I know I was wrong. How would I dare to be enemies with your daughter? It's all because of these two bastards. They forced me to join forces with them to attack your daughter and take the treasure. Senior, please judge clearly. I am sincerely repentant and am willing to serve you faithfully. I will be at your beck and call and will be absolutely loyal to you. I only ask that you show mercy and spare my lowly life." The ferocious-looking one-eyed pirate had no dignity or backbone at all. He had knelt down and surrendered directly. Moreover, he had even blamed the two martial gods of the foreign tribes. The two martial gods were dumbfounded. They glared at the one-eyed pirate and scolded him. "One-eyed pirate, you are slandering us. You are the culprit and you dare to push the blame to us? It was your pirate crew that tried to rope us in and join forces with us. It was also your idea to attack this little girl." The two martial gods pointed at the one-eyed pirate and trembled in anger. They were about to vomit blood. The one-eyed pirate ignored them. He tried his best to put on a pious and respectful appearance and kowtowed to Ji Tianxing. "Senior, they would rather die than surrender and admit their mistakes. They are the ones who deserve to die. I respect and worship you and am willing to serve you for the rest of my life." The two martial gods were so angry that their faces turned green. They could not suppress their injuries and spat out mouthfuls of blood. "Bastard! How can you be so shameless? One-eyed pirate, you are a space pirate. You are a slug with no dignity or backbone." The one-eyed pirate turned a deaf ear to the two's curses. He only looked at Ji Tianxing with a smile. He knew very well that this was the only choice he could make under the current circumstances. If he did not kneel down and surrender and still dared to fight Ji Tianxing, only death would await him. He had to endure the humiliation and save his life first. When Ji Tianxing lowered his guard, he would try to contact the chief or captain. The Falling Star pirate group he belonged to was the strongest pirate group in the Green Sun Galaxy. There were two true god experts among them. As long as the captain brought a large group of people here, they would definitely be able to kill Ji Tianxing and the others. At that time, not only would he regain his freedom, but he would also make a great contribution and be put in an important position by the captain. However, the one-eyed pirate's fantasy was immediately interrupted. "Stop arguing, all of you, shut up." Ji Tianxing waved his hand coldly and shouted. He looked at the one-eyed pirate with a sharp gaze and asked expressionlessly, "You want to be loyal to me? Be my slave?" The one-eyed pirate saw hope and was pleasantly surprised. He nodded without hesitation and said, "Yes." Ji Wushuang frowned and whispered to Ji Tianxing, "Father, you want to take him as a servant? Isn't this guy too ugly?" Ji Tianxing did not answer her. He looked at the one-eyed pirate coldly and said in a mocking tone, "Huh? You think too highly of yourself. You want to be my slave? You don't have that right." As he spoke, he slowly raised his left hand. "All three of you must die." As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his left hand and shot out 3 dazzling sword lights. Swish, swish, swish. The sword lights instantly cut through the sky and attacked the one-eyed pirate and the 2 foreign race martial gods. The sword lights locked onto their souls and they had nowhere to hide. They all widened their eyes in fear. The dazzling golden sword lights rapidly enlarged in their eyes. In the next moment, bam, 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 3 muffled sounds exploded at almost the same time. The one-eyed pirate and the 2 foreign race martial gods were instantly blasted into pieces by the sword lights. Not even their bones were left. Whether they knelt and surrendered or would rather die than submit, they could not escape the fate of death. In front of Ji Tianxing, they did not have the right to play any tricks. "Let's go." After the sword lights dispersed, Ji Tianxing turned and flew away with Ji Wushuang, rushing towards the northwest. The two of them had only flown for tens of thousands of miles when Ji Tianxing received another message from Ji Wuhan. Father, I was attacked by 12 foreign race martial gods near a lake in the south. However, Father, please do not worry. I have been fighting with them for a long time and have already killed 7 of them. I am chasing the remaining 5. Chapter 2682. After receiving Ji Wuhan's message, Ji Tianxing knew that he was also in danger. However, Ji Wuhan was strong, calm and wise. He had already averted the danger. No wonder Qianqian took so long to reply to me. Ji Tianxing muttered and put away the communication jade slip. Ji Wushuang asked with concern, Father, Big Brother is also being attacked? Should we go and save him? Ji Tianxing shook his head and said, No need. Let's go to the northwest. There's still a large group of damned people there. Father, aren't you afraid that Big Brother will have other thoughts if you're so biased? Ji Wushuang blinked her large eyes and muttered softly. Ji Tianxing was amused by her. He extended a finger and tapped her forehead. He said with a smile, What bias? Your Big Brother is young, but he's calm and wise. He can already hold his own. He killed more than half of the foreign race martial gods that surrounded him. 5 of them escaped. He's chasing after them. He'll meet up with us soon. Ji Wushuang touched her fair and smooth forehead and said with an embarrassed smile, Big Brother is still the best. Ji Tianxing did not say anything else. The father and daughter hurried and returned to the mountain range in the northwest half an hour later. The situation was just as Ji Tianxing had expected. The 3 warships and hundreds of heaven-conquering soldiers were still attacking more than a dozen foreign race martial gods. The battle was not over yet. However, the battlefield had shifted 8,000 miles to the north. The number of people on both sides had also decreased. There were originally 19 foreign race martial gods, but now there were only 16 left. Moreover, their injuries were even more severe. The 3 heaven-conquering warships and the 3 gold-armored captains were safe and sound, but the number of heaven-conquering soldiers had decreased by more than 80. Ji Tianxing and his daughter stood in the sky and observed for a moment from nearly 100 miles away. Ji Wushuang could not help but ask, Father, should we kill the heaven-conquering soldiers first or the foreign race martial gods first? Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly, Kill them all. So domineering. Ji Tianxing waved her little fists and looked at Ji Tianxing with starry eyes. Ji Tianxing did not say much. He directly raised his palms and released a golden divine light that covered the sky and earth, pouring it onto the battlefield. Swoosh, swish. In the blink of an eye, the dozens of dazzling golden lights scattered around the battlefield, forming a protective shield that covered an area of 100 miles, sealing off the battlefield. Ji Wushuang revealed a trace of understanding and asked, Father, are you going to catch them all in one fell swoop, leaving no fowls or dogs behind? Yes. Ji Tianxing nodded and explained, If Father were to attack directly, there would be a lot of casualties. Wouldn't those people be scared away? At that time we'll have to waste time chasing after them. That makes sense. Ji Wushuang nodded in agreement. At the same time, the martial gods of the heaven punishers and foreign races inside the sealing formation stopped attacking at the same time. Everyone looked up at the sky and cautiously looked at the golden light seal, searching around for the person who had set up the seal. Under everyone's gazes, Ji Tianxing and Ji Wushuang appeared grandly. Swoosh. He and Ji Wushuang flew to the golden light shield and stood still, looking down at the martial gods of the heaven punishers and foreign races. The 3 golden-armored captains and many heaven punishers did not recognize Ji Tianxing. They roared angrily and swung their weapons at the golden light shield. When the 16 martial gods of the foreign races saw Ji Tianxing's face, their expressions changed drastically. Some were filled with astonishment, some were bewildered, and there were even some who revealed expressions of joy and anticipation. However, there were also some who had grave expressions and their eyes were filled with worry. Him? How is he still alive? That's impossible. The explosion just now could have destroyed the world. It must have something to do with him. The East conquering marshal and many heaven punishers are dead. How can he still be alive? Just how powerful is this person? This person has a blood feud with the heaven punishers. If he kills these heaven punishers, we'll be saved. I'm afraid it's not that simple. He's not related to us. Why would he save us? Why did he set up the seal and seal all of us? Could it be that he wants to kill all of us? More than a dozen martial gods of the foreign races discussed with complicated expressions. They were not in a hurry to attack the golden light shield. Instead, they took the opportunity to retreat. The 3 heaven-punishing battleships and hundreds of heaven punishers attacked the golden light shield with all their might. Boom! Purple light danced in the sky. However, the golden light shield was extremely sturdy. There was not even a crack on it. Ji Tianxing raised his palms expressionlessly and started to control the seal. Swoosh! Under his control, the golden shield shrunk at an extremely fast speed. After a short while, the light shield shrunk from 100 miles to 3,000 feet. More than 400 heaven punishers, 3 gold-armored fleet captains, 3 heaven-punishing battleships, and 16 martial gods of the foreign races were all crowded together. The 3 heaven punishers were as huge as mountains. Now that the light shield had shrunk to such a size, the heaven punishers had no space to move. They could only shrink as well. The 3 fleet captains started to panic. They quickly ordered all the heaven punishers to enter the heaven punishers. At that moment, Ji Tianxing waved his hands and used a secret technique. He shouted softly, "Explode!" As his voice rang out, the golden light ball with a diameter of 3,000 feet suddenly exploded. Boom! Along with an earth-shattering explosion, the golden ball of light exploded with a bang, and golden divine flames that blotted out the sky and covered the earth soared. The 3 heaven-punishing battleships were blown into thousands of pieces and scattered among the ruins. Hundreds of heaven punishers were also blown to pieces and scattered among the mountains. The 16 martial gods of the foreign races and the 3 fleet captains could not escape death. They were blown to pieces and mixed with the dirt and dust. They were buried hundreds of miles away. After a long time, the deafening explosion finally stopped. The golden light in the sky dissipated. The heaven punishers and martial gods of the foreign races no longer existed. Ji Wuxia withdrew her amazed gaze and looked at Ji Tianxing sideways. She said, "Father, I also want to learn this method of killing without spilling blood." She was lively and kind by nature. She was never belligerent and did not like bloody battles. However, this was fate. In order to survive, she had to learn how to fight and kill. However, she still hated the kind of fighting where swords clashed and blood splattered. She could more easily accept the method of controlling supreme divine power and directly destroying the enemy like just now. Ji Tianxing understood his daughter's thoughts. He nodded slightly and said, "This is a true God-level divine power. When you break through to the true God realm, I will teach you." Ji Wuxia quickly nodded, full of anticipation. Then the father and daughter turned around and left to continue searching in the cave. Not long after, Ji Wuhan also dealt with the enemy and sent a message to Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing asked him to continue searching and collect some precious divine items and resources. Ji Wuhan naturally did as he was told. Chapter 2683. 2 days later, Ji Tianxing and his 2 sons left the Blessed Enclave together. There were countless divine items and cultivation resources in the Blessed Enclave. However, they only looted a portion of the precious and rare treasures and resources. They were not interested in those divine items and resources that were made of ordinary materials. The treasures and resources that the 3 of them looted were mainly metal ores and medicinal herbs. The medicinal herbs would be used to refine divine elixirs. The metal ores would be put into the sword world to help the earth spirit race increase their strength and improve their smelting methods. The 3 of them left the Blessed Enclave and returned to the surface of the divine planet. Ji Tianxing piloted the battleship and started searching the divine planet with Ji Wuhan and Ji Wuxia. Marshal Zhendong and the 200 captains he had brought with him had died in the Blessed Enclave. However, there were still more than 60 captains and 6,000 soldiers on the divine planet. They were still searching for resources and hunting down the alien martial gods and space pirates. If they did not kill this group of heaven punishers, it would be a disaster in the future. After all, this group of heaven punishers was large and powerful. No matter which world they invaded, they would be invincible. For the next 2 months, Ji Tianxing had been searching for traces of heaven punishers on the divine planet. At the same time, he looted some precious treasures and resources. During this time, he found more than 50 heaven-punishing battleships. Not only did he destroy those battleships and kill all their captains, but he also killed more than 4,000 soldiers of the Heaven Punishers. As a result, there was basically no sign of Heaven Punishers on the surface of the divine planet. However, the number of battleships did not match. There were more than a dozen battleships and more than 1,000 soldiers of the Heaven Punishers who were missing. Ji Tianxing searched for half a month but did not find anything. He only found some scattered battleships and corpses. He guessed that the battleships and more than 1,000 soldiers of the Heaven Punishers had either fled the divine planet or been killed by the alien martial gods and space pirates. Since that was the case, he did not waste any more time and left the divine planet. A few days later, Tianxing's battleship left the scattered star seas and returned to the Five Elements world. Bai Long, Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang returned to the Nine Heavens 10 Absolutes Tower to cultivate in seclusion. The four divine beasts had also entered the divine pagoda and were recuperating in seclusion in the distorted spacetime. Ji Tianxing checked the treasures and resources he had plundered from the divine planet. Then he controlled the Five Elements world and continued to roam the Azure Sun galaxy. Half a month later, the world of Five Elements crossed the dark void and disappeared into the boundless darkness. The shining god star was still floating in the void, slowly aging and weakening. There were still a lot of treasures and resources left on the divine planet, which benefited the martial gods and space pirates of the Green Sun galaxy. If nothing unexpected happened, a large group of martial gods would soon rush to the divine planet to plunder resources. When all the divine treasures and resources on the divine planet were taken away, the divine planet would deteriorate and age faster. Perhaps after a few thousand years or even tens of thousands of years, half of the divine star would turn into dust and disappear forever. In the blink of an eye, another 2 years had passed. During this time, the Five Elements world had flown more than 20 billion miles in the void. Ji Tianxing had saved 9 more worlds and killed nearly 300 martial gods and more than 30,000 soldiers. He had also encountered 2 planets that were rich in resources but lifeless. He had used the power of the worlds to devour them. After refining the 2 stars, his strength had reached the peak of perfection and had increased by 2 times. However, he was still at the peak of the true God realm and could not break through to the heavenly God realm. 2 years had passed in the outside world. The 4 divine beasts had been recuperating in the distorted spacetime for 100 years. Their injuries had all healed. Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang's strength had also broken through to the true God realm. Ji Tianxing did not forget his previous promise to teach Ji Wushuang the star explosion divine technique. Yun Yao and Ji Ku had been cultivating in seclusion in the distorted spacetime. The Five Elements world had been roaming in the void for more than 10 years, but the 2 of them had been cultivating for 700 years. Their strength had finally caught up to Ji Tianxing and reached the 9th level of the true God realm. Even if they continued to cultivate in seclusion, they would not be able to increase their strength. They could only strengthen their foundation of the divine Tao and make their divine power more powerful and vast. Therefore, the 2 of them ended their seclusion and accompanied Ji Tianxing to kill the Heaven Punishers and save the various worlds. 3 years later, the Five Elements world had reached the center of the Azure Sun galaxy and was close to the Azure Sun planet. At the same time, the news of the death of Marshal Dong and more than 200 captains had already spread throughout the Azure Sun galaxy. Almost all the Heaven Punishers in the Great Worlds knew about this. The martial gods and generals of the heaven-slaying sect were filled with anxiety and worry. Fortunately, the East Expedition Fleet still had a deputy marshal guarding the Azure Sun planet. This person's name was Xianxia, and his strength was second only to Marshal Dong. He had reached the 5th level of the true God realm. Normally, the East conquering marshal had a lot of authority, and he controlled the affairs of the entire fleet. Although Xianxia was the deputy marshal in name, he did not have much real power. He was only equivalent to Marshal Dong's assistant and advisor. Ever since Marshal Dong had died, Deputy Marshal Xianxia was not sad. Instead, he was secretly glad. He could finally take the position and control the entire fleet. From today onwards, he would take the position and change his name to Marshal Riyang. The 3,000 battleships of the East Expedition Fleet, more than 300,000 Heaven Punishers, and more than 400,000 puppet soldiers were all under his control. In just half a month, Admiral Zhou Xian had pacified the morale of the soldiers under his command and taken over the military affairs of the fleet, taking full control of it. The generals and captains guarding the various worlds were all anxious and worried. They all sent messages to Marshal Ruyang to ask for countermeasures. Marshal Ruyang did not hesitate to give orders to deploy the troops. Those planets that did not have enough resources or had not been conquered were temporarily abandoned. The remaining 200 battleships took more than 20,000 Heaven Punishers and returned to the Azure Sun planet. As a result, there were as many as 360 battleships guarding the Azure Sun planet, and more than 60,000 Heaven Punishers. Marshal Ruyang led many captains to strengthen the Azure Sun planet's divine light shield and added many defense divine arrays to the Heaven Punishing Temple. In just 2 years, the defense of the Azure Sun planet had increased by 3 times. Everyone knew that Marshal Ruyang wanted to defend the Azure Sun planet against Ji Tianxing's sudden attack. After all, Ji Tianxing had come aggressively and his methods were ruthless. He could even kill the Eastern Marshal. How strong was he? Marshal Ruyang guessed that Ji Tianxing would come to the Azure Sun planet. However, there was no way he would run away without a fight. If he did, he would be severely punished by the Heaven Punishers and become the laughingstock of the Heaven Punishers. In the past 2 years, Marshal Ruyang had not only strengthened the defense of the Azure Sun planet and the Heaven Punishing Temple, but he had also deployed the corresponding countermeasures and plans. He had built the Black Sun into an impregnable fortress. The 360 martial gods and 60,000 elite warriors were also united and had high morale. Now, Marshal Ruyang had prepared everything. He was sitting in the Heaven Punishing Temple waiting for Ji Tianxing to come and die. Chapter 2684. The void was dark, cold, and dead silent. The dazzling golden 5 elements world silently approached the Black Sun, its speed gradually slowing down. Looking at it from billions of miles away, the huge Black Sun hung quietly in the void. The size of this planet was only 30% smaller than the 5 elements world. Among the many stars in the Azure Sun galaxy, this was already the largest star in terms of size. The entire surface of the planet was protected by a thick green light, like a dark green sun. This was how the Black Sun got its name. Around the Black Sun, in the void hundreds of millions of miles away, there were more than a dozen planets of different sizes. Those stars, big or small, were all barren stars without life. They were like loyal guards, guarding the Black Sun firmly. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and Ji Ku stood on the golden light barrier of the 5 elements world and looked at the Black Sun from afar. The Black Sun's position and the surrounding planets are much better than the Purple Cloud planet. If there's a heavenly god-level powerhouse, he can set up powerful divine formations and astral divine cannons on the surrounding 16 planets and turn them into satellites of the Black Sun. Once there's an invasion, the 16 satellites will be able to detect the enemy's movements in advance and launch attacks and interceptions. Yun Yao and Ji Ku both understood that the so-called satellites referred to the guardian planets. Yun Yao nodded slightly in agreement. Ji Ku shook his head with a smile and said, "If it's a god from the upper realm, he'll naturally do that. However, this is the mortal world. Under the heavenly axiom, no one can break through to the heavenly god level, so no one can use that kind of divine power. Moreover, even if there's an invasion, there'll only be martial gods and true gods. The Black Sun's divine light barrier alone is enough to stop most true gods." Indeed, whether it was the Black Sun or the Purple Cloud planet, the divine light barrier formed by the heavenly axiom was a heavenly god-level defense. 99% of true gods could not break through the divine light barrier. Only peerless powerhouses like Ji Tianxing and the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher, who had special opportunities and techniques, could break through the divine light barrier and invade the various planets. Ji Ku's words made Ji Tianxing feel a little emotional. If it weren't for the Heaven Punisher race causing chaos in the 3,000 worlds, we would have ascended to the divine world and become heavenly gods. Only after reaching the heavenly god realm and condensing a godhead could one be considered a true god. At that time, I'll be able to use all kinds of divine abilities. Yun Yao nodded again and said in a low voice, "Yes. We can ascend and leave. The grudges of this mortal world have nothing to do with us." However, the heaven-destroying race had their eyes on the 5 elements world. They were determined to invade and even destroy it. Our parents, relatives, and friends will also be enslaved by the Heaven Crushers or even slaughtered. Moreover, the Heaven Punishers had powerful gods supporting them, so they could avoid the laws of heaven and avoid the 9 heavenly tribulations. All signs indicated that the Heaven Punisher race and the god spirit behind them were plotting something. No matter what, we have to destroy the Heaven Punisher race before we can ascend with peace of mind. Seeing the gloomy atmosphere, Jiku comforted them. Big brother Tianqing, eldest senior sister, you don't have to worry too much. With our current strength, we are invincible in the galaxy. As long as we sweep through the 3 major star zones and reach the Heaven Punisher planet, it will be the end of the Heaven Punisher race. At most, in a few decades, we will be able to destroy the Heaven Punisher race and successfully ascend to the divine world. Ji Tianqing nodded and said, "That's right. That's my plan. Let's not talk about this for now. Let's deal with the Black Sun first. Although we have plundered a large amount of treasures and resources from the divine world and killed Martial Dong and many other Heaven Punisher martial gods, there is still Martial Dong. The East Conquering Fleet still has a vice-marshal called Xianxia, who is overseeing the Black Sun. After Martial Dong is killed, Xianxia will definitely take over the marshal's position and control the situation. We have to kill him and save the Black Sun. Only then can we intimidate the East Conquering Fleet." Yun Yao thought for a moment and said, "The 3 of us will go to the Black Sun. There's no need to bring the others. The 4 divine beasts have just recovered from their injuries. They still need to cultivate in seclusion for a while. Wuhan and Wushuang have just broken through to the true immortal realm. They still need to cultivate and stabilize their divine Tao foundation. Bai Long needs to stay in the 5 elements world to prevent any accidents." Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku both agreed with her arrangement. One day later, the 5 elements world slowed down to the lowest speed and stopped in the void 100 million miles away from the Black Sun. Ji Tianqing took out the Tianqing battleship and flew toward the Black Sun with Yun Yao and Ji Ku. 100 million miles was considered very close to the 2 massive stars. However, it was an extremely long journey for ordinary immortals. Even though the Tianqing battleship's flying speed was comparable to that of a heavenly god realm elite, Ji Tianqing and the other 2 used 10 days to reach the Black Sun. When the Tianqing battleship landed on the blue light barrier, Ji Tianqing immediately felt that something was wrong. How can the divine light barrier of the Black Sun be so thick? Its power is twice as strong as the barrier of the purple cloud planet. Could it be that the heavenly Tao is taking special care of the Black Sun? No, it must be that the Heaven Punishers on the Black Sun have strengthened the divine light barrier. Yun Yao and Ji Ku also noticed this. After careful observation, they came to a conclusion. That's right. The divine light barrier of the Black Sun has been strengthened by someone. I've already sensed that there are many divine arrays inside the divine light barrier and the aura of the Heaven Punishers. Yun Yao was very sensitive to the aura of power. Marshal Ruyang and the Heaven Punisher's deployment could not escape her detection. Ji Ke looked at Ji Tianqing and asked, "Brother Tianqing, is there a way to enter the Black Sun? Will it be very troublesome?" Ji Tianqing smiled and shook his head. He took out the sword of burial of heaven and said, "No matter how strong it is, it's still a heavenly god-level barrier. With the origin stone divine sword in hand, there's no pressure at all." Then he used the divine eye secret technique and carefully observed the azure barrier. Half a day later, he found an area where the power was slightly weaker and started to break the barrier. With the help of the sword of burial of heaven, he only used 1 day to break a hole in the azure barrier. A hole that was 3 meters in diameter and 10 feet deep appeared in front of the 3 of them. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Ji Tianqing and the others passed through the passage-like hole and entered the Black Sun. At the same time, on the Black Sun, high above the boundless sky ocean, in the Golden Heaven Punisher Divine Palace, a large array that monitored the divine light barrier suddenly flashed with purple light and issued a warning. A moment later, the Heaven Punisher martial god who was guarding the divine array noticed something unusual and quickly reported it to Marshal Ruyang. Marshal Ruyang, who had been recuperating for a long time, was instantly filled with fighting spirit and gave the order to gather. When the news spread, the entire Heaven Punisher Divine Palace was awakened. Many Heaven Punisher martial gods and guards gathered on the plaza and waited for Marshal Ruyang's orders. A well-planned hunting operation that had been premeditated for a long time was thus kicked off. Chapter 2685. The Black Sun was a foreign world that Ji Tianqing had never been to before. After entering the Black Sun, the 3 of them did not act rashly. They knew that Marshal Ruyang was prepared and had even strengthened the defenses. Why would they attack rashly? Ji Tianxing brought Yun Yao and Ji Ku to a continent. After some small tricks, the three of them disguised themselves and sneaked into a bustling main city. More than 2 million martial artists and civilians lived in the city with a radius of 300 miles. A heaven-conquering martial god and more than 30 heaven-conquering warriors were guarding the prosperous city. The martial artists and civilians in the city had become slaves of the martial gods. In recent decades, the slaves had been oppressed by the martial gods. Not only were all their cultivation resources and belongings confiscated, but they also had to work hard every day and night to collect cultivation resources. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao remained invisible and easily snuck into the city governor's mansion. They captured the martial god guarding the mansion. The martial god was a captain and only had the strength of a 4th-level martial god. Ji Tianxing captured him easily and did not give him a chance to escape or send a message. He did not even make a sound. However, Ji Tianxing performed the soul-searching secret technique and took away the martial god's memory. As a result, not only did he learn about the situation on the Black Sun, but he also learned about Marshal Riyang's plan. The Black Sun has 4 continents and 18 divine kingdoms, which are controlled by 9 generals and 72 martial gods of the heavens. We're in Windwell City on the Waning Moon continent. The Heaven Palace built by Marshal Zhendong is in the Sky Ocean between the Waning Moon continent and the Wind Frost continent. This poor guy has low strength and status. He's only been to the Heaven Palace once. As he spoke, Ji Tianxing casually shot out a ball of golden flames and burned the unconscious heaven-defying martial god to ashes. Yun Yao frowned and asked, Tianxing, how many martial gods and martial gods are there on the Black Sun? Should we attack the heaven-punishing divine palace directly, or should we assassinate the martial gods one by one? Ji Tianxing fused with the memories of the Lord of Windwell City and replied without hesitation. After Marshal Riyang took control of the power, he guessed that I would come to deal with him. Therefore he withdrew a large number of martial gods and warriors and strengthened the defenses of the Black Sun and the heaven-punishing divine palace. Currently, there were 360 martial gods and 60,000 heaven crusaders on the Black Sun. Among them, there were 60 martial gods and 20,000 soldiers of the heavenly expedition guarding the 4 continents. The remaining 300 martial gods and 40,000 heaven-punishing warriors are all waiting for orders in the heaven-punishing divine palace. Ji Ku also frowned. He said gravely, in that case, Marshal Riyang wants to defend the heaven-punishing divine hall and fight us there? Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and shook his head. That's not necessarily true. Marshal Riyang has already made sufficient preparations. It won't be that simple. It's just that only he knows what his plan is. After pausing for a moment, he added another sentence. A year ago, Marshal Riyang led over 100 martial gods and set up a large number of divine arrays on the Azure Light Barrier. Among them, there were many divine arrays that monitored the movements of the Azure Light Barrier. Once the Azure Light Barrier was destroyed and an expert invaded, the divine arrays in the heaven-punishing divine palace would sound the alarm. The Lord of Windwell City happened to be involved in setting up the divine arrays, so he knew about this. Yun Yao frowned and said in a low voice, in that case, Marshal Riyang must know that we are here. If he is vigilant enough, he can even use some divine arrays to monitor our location. Ji Tianxing nodded. Maybe. Marshal Riyang is not as strong as Marshal Zhendong, but he is very cautious. Ji Ku raised his eyebrows and said with a playful smile, it seems that this will be a head-on battle. What's there to be afraid of? Ji Tianxing did not think much of it and was full of confidence. Yun Yao asked, now we already know the layout of the Black Sun planet and the approximate location of the heaven-punishing divine palace. Should we continue to operate in the Waning Moon continent or go directly to the heaven-punishing divine palace? Of course we should go to the heaven-punishing divine palace and wipe out the heaven punishers. Ji Tianxing said with a serious face. If the 3 of us can't even take care of these small fries, how can we go to the heaven-punishing divine palace and wipe out the heaven punishers? He had already made his decision. Yun Yao and Ji Ku naturally agreed and would not stop him. Then the 3 of them left Windwell City quietly and flew toward the east. The Wind Frost continent was to the east of the Waning Moon continent. Between the 2 continents was the boundless Sky Sea. In order to reach the Sky Sea as soon as possible, Ji Tianxing steered the battleship and sped through the sky. In just 3 days, the battleship left the Waning Moon continent and entered the Sky Sea. Not only were there billions of fish and prawns in the boundless sky sea, but there were also many powerful sea beasts. When the battleship flew over the sky sea, Ji Tianqing and the other two saw many sea beasts that were as big as mountains. They cut through the waves and fought with their lives in the sky sea. Of course, to the three of them who were peak true gods, this was a small scene. If there were any ignorant sea beasts that dared to attack them, they would definitely be blasted into pieces. Before they knew it, another day had passed. At that moment, the sun was shining brightly and the sky sea was turbulent. All of a sudden, 3 heaven-slicing battleships flew over from the front. They were arranged in a triangular formation as they sped toward them. Ji Tianqing noticed them, but he did not intend to avoid them. Instead, he sped up and charged toward them. Zhou Tianqing's battleship turned into a ray of black light and shot across the sky at lightning speed, crashing into the battleship in the middle. The 3 battleships noticed Tianqing's battleship and paused for a while. Then they opened the main cannons at the front of the battleship and shot out blinding purple light beams. Boom, boom, boom. 3 giant purple light beams with great power blasted toward Tianqing's battleship. When the purple light beams approached, Tianqing's battleship suddenly flipped a few times and suddenly descended 300 feet, dodging the attack of the light beams. In the next moment, Tianqing's battleship crashed into the heaven-punishing battleship in the middle. Boom, crack. In the deafening sound, the heaven-punishing battleship that was 1,000 feet long was smashed into pieces. More than half of the heaven-punishing warriors in the battleship were killed or injured. They fell into the sky sea like dumplings. The leader of the golden armored battleship was also injured. He fell into the sky and quickly turned around to run away. Before Ji Tianqing could say anything, Yun Yao and Ji Ku flew out of the battleship and attacked with their divine swords and spears. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Sword radiance flashed and spears covered the sky. In just 3 breaths, Yun Yao and Ji Ku killed all the heaven-punishing warriors who were lucky enough to survive. The injured golden armored battleship was also stabbed by Ji Ku's spear and his body exploded. The other 2 heaven-punishing battleships were scared out of their wits when they saw this scene. They turned around and ran away in a hurry. Yun Yao and Ji Ku returned to Tianqing's battleship. Ji Tianqing quickly piloted the battleship and started to chase after them. The 2 parties sped over the sea like 3 rays of black light shooting across the sky. The distance between the 2 of them was constantly shrinking. Chapter 2686. In order to escape, the 2 heaven-conquering battleships pushed their power to the maximum. They lit up with a dazzling purple light, dragging long purple flames behind them. As time passed, the distance between the 2 sides continued to shrink. 200 kilometers, 180 kilometers, 150 kilometers, 120 kilometers. After 15 minutes, the distance between the 2 sides had shrunk to about 20 kilometers. At such a close distance, the 2 heaven-conquering battleships were already within the attack range of Tianqing's battleship. Ji Tianqing decisively opened the main cannon of the heaven-conquering battleship and blasted out a dazzling golden beam of light. Boom! Following a loud explosion, the 10,000 feet long golden beam of light with destructive power blasted toward the heaven-conquering battleship on the left. Ji Tianqing and the others were surprised by what happened next. The heaven-conquering battleship on the left knew that it had been locked onto and had nowhere to run. Before it died, it actually released 3 dazzling purple beams of light that blasted toward the heaven-conquering battleship on the right. Kaboom! In the next instant, a deafening explosion erupted. The golden beam of light blasted the heaven-conquering battleship on the left into smithereens, bursting into golden flames. The entire heaven-conquering battleship was destroyed. Hundreds of heaven-conquering battleships and the captain of the golden armor battleship were blasted into smithereens. However, at the same time, the 3 purple beams of light struck the heaven-conquering battleship on the right. Bam! Following a muffled explosion, the heaven-conquering battleship was forcefully pushed 50 kilometers away. Furthermore, after the 3 purple beams of light were absorbed, its speed also doubled. In the blink of an eye, the heaven-conquering battleship on the right had traveled 500 kilometers, leaving Tianqing's battleship in the dust. There's such a thing? Ji Ku's eyes widened as he looked at the heaven-conquering battleship with a shocked expression. Yun Yao also frowned and said in a low voice, The heaven-conquering battleship on the left knew that it was going to die, so it helped its teammate before it died. Looks like they were already prepared and planned. Ji Tianxing said in a playful tone. You mean they were bait released by Marshal Riyang to lure us into an ambush? Yun Yao nodded and said, it's possible. Haha. Ji Tianxing chuckled and said, if that's the case, then I'll have to keep the battleship and not destroy it immediately. After all, it still has to lead us to Marshal Riyang and the heaven-destroying army. Upon hearing this, Yun Yao and Ji Ku understood what he meant and gripped their divine swords and divine spears tightly. Very quickly 2 hours passed. A huge island appeared in front of them. The island was formed by pitch-black reefs, with a circumference of over 1,000 miles, standing alone on the ocean surface. The island was covered with a primitive jungle and it was extremely dense. The heaven-slicing battleship, which was fleeing in panic, unleashed the last of its strength and charged towards the island without regard for anything else. Shwa. A few breaths later, the heaven-slicing battleship entered the island and disappeared into the depths of the forest. At this time, Tianxing's battleship flew across the sky unhurriedly and flew towards the island. When they were 200 miles away from the island, Yun Yao and Ji Ku both raised their eyebrows and a cold light flashed in their eyes. Tianxing, there are more than a dozen heaven-slicing battleships 50 miles under the sea to our left. Brother Tianxing, there are also more than a dozen heaven-slicing battleships hidden in the depths of the sea to our right. Ji Tianxing nodded to show that he understood. He pointed to the top of his head and chuckled. There are also more than a dozen heaven-slicing battleships hidden in the sky above us. Obviously, this is an ambush arranged by Marshal Riyang and he's waiting for us to take the bait. Although he said so, he had no intention of slowing down. He controlled the battleship to continue flying towards the island. Yun Yao couldn't help but ask, since we've already discovered them, why are we still entering the island? Aren't you worried that Marshal Riyang has some kind of killer move? Ji Tianxing said calmly. He's just a 5th heaven true god and 300 heaven-slicing battleship captains. What kind of killer move can he have? Unless the heaven-slicing great emperor, the emperor's son, and the queen goddess are lying in ambush here at the same time, they won't be a threat to us. The rest of the heaven-slicing battleships are all useless. When he finished speaking, Tianxing's battleship had already flown to the top of the island and stopped in the air above a vast forest. At this time, a purple light shot up into the sky around the island and a barrier that covered the sky appeared. Swoosh. In just 2 breaths, the dark purple light barrier covered a radius of 1,000 miles and sealed the entire island. This was a super divine formation that was made up of 9 great formations. Its power was infinitely close to the heavenly god tier. After the formation was activated, a majestic divine power pressed down and froze the space within 1,000 miles. Then purple lights lit up under the sea and in the sky around the island. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Hundreds of heaven-slicing battleships descended from the sky like huge black beasts and surged out from the sea. After a while, the numerous battleships formed a huge circle and surrounded the island. Every battleship opened up the divine cannons on the side and aimed hundreds of cannons at the island. One after another, captains in golden armor appeared in the sky with more than 100 heaven-slicing battleships. Suddenly, the sky around the island was filled with battleships filled with murderous intent. Tens of thousands of warriors in black armor stood in the sky. They held swords, spears, swords and halberds in their hands and stared at the island covetously. The scene in front of him was not out of Ji Tianxing's expectations. He remained calm as he scanned the sky indifferently and said, 160 battleships and 30,000 heaven-slicing battleships. Looks like a few dozen battleships have been sent out as bait. There are also 100 battleships and 10,000 heaven-slicing battleships. They are Marshal Riyang's trump cards and are guarding the heaven-slicing divine palace. Ji Ku said in a serious tone, Brother Tianxing, the other party has set up a divine formation and so many people in ambush. What's your plan? Ji Tianxing shook his head and said, in the face of absolute power, these schemes and tricks are useless. I don't have a plan. I'll just act according to the situation and slaughter to my heart's content. Ji Ku and Yun Yao looked at each other and both of them revealed a helpless expression. Just as the 3 of them were talking, a black battleship that was 20,000 feet long and looked like a giant shark descended from the sky and landed in the fleet. Swoosh. This ferocious-looking and domineering battleship was Marshal Ruyang's battleship. The captains in golden armor and heaven-slicing battleships looked at the marshal's battleship and bowed slightly to show their respect. After the battleship stopped, the huge and heavy cabin door opened. Ka. A skinny, purplish-black man walked out of the battleship. He was wearing a dark golden helmet, purple armor and a dark golden cape. He exuded a domineering and majestic aura. 8 heaven-slicing martial gods in golden armor followed behind him with swords and sabers hanging from their waists. They were obviously his guards. This skinny heaven-slicing martial god was Marshal Ruyang. He stood proudly in the sky and stared at Tianqing's battleship on the island with a smug smile. Chapter 2687. Tianqing, welcome to the Black Sun planet. Shui has been waiting for you for more than 2 years. You're finally here. Marshal Ruyang laughed coldly. His voice reverberated in the air above the island. For many years there have been legends about you in our tribe. It is said that you killed the southern and eastern marshals and slaughtered hundreds of thousands of our soldiers. Now it seems that the rumors are exaggerated. With your ability and intelligence, Shui wonders how you managed to survive until today. More than 100 golden armored warship captains and 30,000 soldiers stared at the Tianqing warship on the island. Hearing Marshal Qin Yang's words, everyone sneered disdainfully and mockingly. A few generals even waved their swords and shouted, "Bastard Tianqing, come out and face your death. Tianqing, you must be terrified and desperate right now, right? Haha. Little bastard, only death awaits you if you go against our tribe. Marshal Ruyang is here. Tianqing, you little brat, kowtow and surrender. Tianqing, do you dare to show yourself and fight?" The crowd's shouts ignited the blood of many soldiers. Their fighting spirit soared. At the same time, inside the Tianqing warship, Tianqing told Yun Yao and Ku, "Ku, you will control the warship. Yao, you will fight with me." Ku knew that it was safer to stay in the warship. She quickly objected and said firmly, "Brother Tianqing, I will fight with you. Let senior sister control the warship." Before Tianqing could say anything, Yun Yao shook her head and refused. She said calmly, "Ku, the 3 of us are the most important people to each other. We are bound together for good or ill. No matter who it is, nothing will happen to them. On top of that, Tianqing needs my cooperation to cast the heavenly deity skill and break the sealing formation." Ku was at a loss for words. He was filled with worry. Tianqing and Yun Yao didn't say anything more and flew out in a flash. Shua. The husband and wife appeared together and stood high in the sky, looking down at Marshal Ruyang from above. Both of them were dressed in white. Their sleeves fluttered in the wind, and their auras were noble and elegant, just like the gods of the 9 heavens. The tens of thousands of pairs of eyes around the island immediately focused on the 2 of them. Tianqing looked at Marshal Ruyang indifferently and sneered, "Ruyang, is this island the place you chose to bury yourself? More than 30,000 people will be buried with you. Your life is worth it." His domineering voice spread over a radius of 1,000 miles. The 30,000 plus people could clearly hear the fluent language of the Heaven Punisher. Many of the Heaven Punisher soldiers were instantly enraged. They started to curse and roar. Marshal Ruyang furrowed his brows. Then his brows relaxed and he sneered disdainfully, "I've long heard that your strength isn't that great, but your tone is extremely arrogant. Today I see that it's true. Shui really can't understand. You're already surrounded and about to be turned into ashes under the bombardment of thousands of cannons. How can you still have the courage to talk nonsense here? Instead of arguing, why don't you just stretch out your neck and commit suicide on the spot? That way you can die a more dignified death. Moreover, Shui will be merciful and let go of your 2 wives. Shui will take your head and ask the great emperor for a reward. After Shui's meteoric rise, he will definitely take good care of your wives." Ha. Tianqing sneered contemptuously. His voice was so loud that it could pierce through gold and crack rocks. "People as pitifully stupid as you are getting rarer and rarer. Forget it, I don't want to waste my breath on you. Before you die, I'll give you a piece of advice. You won't have a chance to use the trump card that you've been keeping. Gather all the 10,000 heaven-slaying dogs here." As he spoke, Tianqing looked around and pointed at the 30,000 soldiers in the sky. he said disdainfully. These useless soldiers and crab generals are not enough for me to kill. They're far from enough. Everyone was shocked when they heard this. Not only was Marshal Ryong shocked and angry, but his eyes were also filled with murderous intent. The 30,000 Heaven Punisher soldiers were so angry that their faces turned red. Their blood was flowing in reverse. All of them roared and roared. What an arrogant bastard. If the heavens want a man to die, they must first make him mad. This bastard has gone mad. Ha! What a joke. Ji Tianxing is so arrogant that he's lost his mind. Go ahead and be as arrogant as you like. These are your last words anyway. Marshal, are you still wasting time on that lunatic? Give the order to kill him. It's not enough to just kill Ji Tianxing. We must cut him into pieces and grind his bones to dust. Curses and roars resounded in the sky one after another. Especially the 100 or so golden armor captains. All of them looked like they had been injected with chicken blood. Their morale and fighting spirit were high. Marshal Zhuiyang calmed down and stared at Ji Tianxing. He put on a pitiful look and sighed. Ji Tianxing, who was hailed as the strongest opponent of our race, has lost his mind in a hopeless situation. He has become the biggest joke in the world. Since you want to die, Ben Shuai will give you a quick death. Marshal Ryong waved his hand and ordered, everyone listen up. Activate the Samsara Annihilation Formation and kill Ji Tianxing. The 160 captains of the golden armored ships replied in unison. Then, everyone channeled their energy and shot out a red light into the Samsara Annihilation Formation. In an instant, the Samsara Annihilation Formation's power more than doubled and started to operate quickly. More than 90 million purple light blades appeared in the formation. They poured down like a snowstorm and drowned the entire island. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Every purple light blade was comparable to the attack of a first-level true god. The endless light blades flew back and forth and immediately shredded the island into pieces, turning it into sand and dust that fell into the sky. However, Tianxing's battleship was safe and sound. The light blades could not hurt it at all. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao were in the endless light blades and were also unharmed. You dare to call this crude formation the Samsara Annihilation Formation? You're just a frog at the bottom of a well. Hilarious. Ji Tianxing sneered disdainfully and held the Burial of Heaven sword tightly with both hands. Yun Yao and he had a telepathic connection. They did not need to talk and she understood what he meant. She immediately took out the Source Stone Divine Sword. Then the two of them started to use their techniques. They pushed their god power to the limit, and their bodies lit up with divine light that shot into the sky. Sword breaking 9 heavens. In the next moment, Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao shouted at the same time and swung their divine swords toward the south. Suddenly, endless golden divine light gushed out from the two divine swords, forming a 300-mile-long 9 heavens divine dragon in the sky. Roar. Accompanied by a dragon roar that tore heaven and earth and shook the universe. The 300-mile-long divine dragon sword aura slashed the dark purple divine light shield in an invincible manner. At this moment, the sun and moon lost their light and heaven and earth lost their color. The spirit chi of heaven and earth within 100,000 miles was sucked dry. The hearts of more than 30,000 soldiers of the heaven-punishing army stopped beating instantly and they all looked terrified. Chapter 2688. No one could believe it. The 300-mile-long divine dragon sword shadow in the sky was released by Ji Tianxing. It was so powerful that it could swallow the heavens and the earth. The power and aura of that sword had exceeded the knowledge of many members of the Heaven Punisher. Marshal Ryong knew that even the great emperor of the Heaven Punisher, who was half a step away from becoming a heavenly god, might not be able to unleash such a terrifying attack. Thus, his heart felt as if it had fallen into an ice cellar and his entire body was cold. In the next moment, a loud explosion that shook the universe erupted and resounded through the clouds. Marshal Ryong had spent countless resources to set up the 1,000-mile-wide array, but it had been shattered by the divine dragon sword shadow. A huge crack tore the formation into 2 halves, and purple light fragments splattered out in all directions. A destructive storm followed the divine dragon sword shadow and swept toward the battleships and members of the Heaven Punisher. Marshal Ryong reacted the fastest. He immediately teleported away when he realized that a disaster was about to befall him. However, the battleships and members of the Heaven Punisher were instantly destroyed. Boom, boom, boom. The divine dragon sword Shadow's power did not decrease as it slashed into the crowd. At least 5,000 members of the Heaven Punisher and more than 30 battleships were hit by the divine dragon sword Shadow. These people and battleships did not have the chance to dodge or fight back. They were instantly blasted into pieces. The sky that had been filled with people was immediately cleared out. Immediately after, a devastating storm swept over. The storm passed through the empty space and affected more than 4,000 members of the Heaven Punisher and more than 20 battleships. Swoosh. The members of the Heaven Punisher were shattered in the storm, and the battleships also collapsed. Billions of pieces and debris were blown thousands of miles away by the storm and scattered in the vast ocean. After a long while, the earth-shattering storm finally dissipated. The island regained its peace. The divine array within a 1,000-mile-wide radius gradually collapsed. The huge pirate fleet also disappeared. The place where it had been turned into a blue sea with huge waves. A huge gap appeared in the encirclement in the sky. The southern region was empty. Only the battleships and members of the Heaven Punisher from the east, west, and north were left. There were only 100 battleships left, and the number of members of the Heaven Punisher decreased by 10,000. There were only 20,000 of them left. An invisible and terrifying aura enveloped the sea. The hearts and souls of the survivors were filled with shock and fear. The soldiers of the heavenly expedition, who had been full of fighting spirit and killing intent, were all listless like eggplants that had been hit by frost. Shua. Golden and blue lights flashed. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao stepped out and stood proudly in the sky. Behind them, the 2,000 Zhonglong Tianxing battleship floated quietly in the sky. The 100 cannons on the side of the ship were all opened, preparing for an attack that could destroy heaven and earth. The world was silent. Marshal Ruyang, who had fled thousands of miles away, was lucky enough to escape. While the soldiers were not paying attention, he quietly flew back into the crowd and stood still. At this moment, Ji Tianxing's cold voice came from the sky. I've said it before, these chickens and dogs are not enough for me to kill. Jingyang, it's not too late to surrender now. When I swing my sword again, you will die without a burial ground. The cold and emotionless voice was like a heavy hammer that slammed into Marshal Ruyang's heart. He was filled with fear and looked at Ji Tianxing with eyes that were about to pop out of their sockets. At this moment he finally understood. No wonder Ji Tianxing could destroy the Southern Expedition fleet and kill the Eastern Expedition Marshal and live until today unscathed. No wonder Ji Tianxing dared to step into the Black Sun with only 2 wives. Turned out that he was so powerful. The rumors of the heavenly expedition were not true at all. Ji Tianxing's true strength was far more terrifying than the rumors said. Thinking of this, Marshal Ruyang felt a trace of regret in his heart. If he had known that Ji Tianxing was so powerful, he would not have harbored such extravagant hopes and insisted on staying on the Black Sun. If he had given up on the Black Sun and escaped without fighting, he could have preserved his strength and life. But now it was too late to say anything. Marshal Ruyang was silent. He was full of hesitation and conflict. However, more than 100 captains and 20,000 soldiers of the heavenly expedition all looked at him. How could he surrender to Ji Tianxing in front of so many people? How could he maintain his position in the heavenly expedition race after suffering such humiliation? In the blink of an eye, Marshal Ruyang made up his mind. He pulled himself together and looked at Ji Tianxing with burning eyes. He shouted, Ji Tianxing, so what if you're very strong? You don't understand the heavenly expedition race. We cannot be corrupted by wealth and we cannot submit to power. Even if you can destroy the bodies of our warriors, you will never be able to destroy our unyielding, loyal souls. The heavenly expedition race will never submit. His powerful voice reverberated in the air above the sea. The extinguished fighting spirit of the soldiers was immediately reignited. Countless people's blood boiled and hope reappeared in their eyes. We will rather die than submit. Fight to the end. Fight to the death with him. We would rather die standing than live kneeling. Many martial gods and soldiers of the heavenly expedition race waved their weapons and shouted with high fighting spirit. Ji Tianxing didn't say anything. He only raised the sword of burial of heaven expressionlessly and used his ultimate killing move. Sword rain. He put his left hand behind his back and pointed the sword at the sky with his right hand. His voice was as loud as a bell. Suddenly, tens of thousands of stars lit up in the sky. Countless giant swords thousands of feet long fell from the sky. Before the swords arrived, an invisible force that suppressed the heavens and shattered everything had already sealed off the area within 1,000 miles. Marshal Riyang and the 20,000 soldiers were suppressed by the invisible force. Their faces turned pale and their bodies bent. They stubbornly raised their heads and looked at the sky. When they saw the tens of thousands of meteors shooting down, everyone's eyes widened. Fear and despair filled their eyes. Boom, boom, boom. Finally, the tens of thousands of meteor swords fell and drowned the sea within 1,000 miles. The heavens and earth became silver and bright. It was so bright that no one could open their eyes. Most of the soldiers of the heavenly expedition race closed their eyes forever under the attack of the giant swords. Along with the deafening explosion, countless whirlpools appeared in the ocean and waves splashed out. Groups of soldiers of the heavenly expedition race were killed by the giant swords. Pieces of flesh and blood were thrown into the air. Crimson and purple blood fell into the sea and dyed the blue sea dark red. Battleships after battleships were cut in half by the giant swords and fell into the sea. But this was only the beginning of the disaster. Yun Yao also swung the Dawn Stone Divine Sword and shot out Starlight Sword auras. Swish, swish. The sword auras were like shuttles, crescent moons, waterfalls and rivers. They flew across the heavens and earth. Anyone who was struck by the sword light was instantly crushed to pieces and killed on the spot. Jike didn't stay idle either. He controlled the Tianqing battleship to unleash the strongest power and kept shooting out golden light beams. The golden light beams were as dense as a rainstorm and bombarded the sea repeatedly. Facing such a terrifying attack, the soldiers of the heavenly expedition race were terrified and had no chance to fight back. Even Marshal Qingyang was forced to flee in a sorry state, dodging all over the place. Chapter 2689. 30,000 soldiers of the heaven-conquering army against Ji Tianqing and his two companions. This was a battle where there was a huge disparity in numbers. It should have been a one-sided battle. In the end, it was indeed a one-sided massacre. However, the targets of the massacre were the soldiers of the heaven-conquering army, who outnumbered the enemy by 10,000. In the midst of the massacre, Marshal Riyang led many captains and launched a desperate counterattack. However, the results were minimal. They could not hurt Ji Tianqing and his two companions at all. The massacre lasted for a full 45 minutes before it gradually stopped. It was not because Ji Tianqing and his two companions had exhausted their divine power and were unable to continue. It was because almost all 30,000 soldiers of the heaven-conquering army had been killed. Corpses were everywhere in the chaotic 1,000-mile sea. The surface of the sea was dyed dark red. All the warships had been destroyed, including Marshal Riyang's ship. An extremely small number of survivors gathered around Marshal Zhuiyang, their hearts filled with despair and despair. They saw Marshal Riyang standing in the middle. Beside him were 6 captains covered in blood. Behind him were more than 60 soldiers of the heaven-conquering army who were wearing black armor and missing limbs. Only so few of the 30,000 soldiers of the heaven-conquering army were left. They were all seriously injured and were at the end of their rope. Everyone was in complete despair. They gave up resisting and running away. On the other hand, Ji Tianqing and his two companions were safe and sound. They stood calmly in the sky. Ji Tianqing looked at Marshal Riyang and his companions expressionlessly. He slowly raised his left hand. Destructive divine power was accumulating in his body. In the next moment he only needed to punch out and Marshal Riyang and his companions would be reduced to ashes. At this moment of life and death, the hearts of the soldiers of the heaven-conquering army were in their throats. Their eyes were filled with despair. Marshal Riyang hesitated for a moment. He took 2 steps forward and shouted anxiously, "Wait." Ji Tianqing's left hand was clenched into a fist. It stopped in midair and he looked at him expressionlessly. "Marshal Riyang, what else do you have to say?" Marshal Riyang made up his mind and bowed without hesitation. "Ji Tianqing. Ben Shuai was blind and should not have ambushed you here. Ben Shuai admits defeat. I surrender to you now. You're a peerless expert and we're just weak ants that can't threaten you at all. Why do you have to kill us all? The dozens of soldiers behind him also knelt in the sky and kowtowed in unison, begging for mercy. We are willing to surrender, please spare our lowly lives, let us live. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows, and the corners of his mouth curled into a playful smile. Ha! Just now who was the one who passionately said that I don't understand the Heaven Punishers? And who was it that said righteously that the Heaven Punishers were loyal souls who would rather die than submit? Now it seems like I really don't understand the Heaven Punishers. The thick sense of mockery caused Marshal Qingyang and the others' faces to turn red, and they felt extremely ashamed and angry. However, everyone lowered their heads and did not dare to refute. What was there to refute? Just now, the soldiers had been beating their chests and shouting, as if they were facing death calmly and righteously. Now they were kneeling and surrendering without any dignity or backbone. The words they said were like farts. How fragrant! Seeing that no one had anything to say, Ji Tianxing did not waste any more time. His left fist lit up with a dazzling divine light. Marshal Riyang saw that he was unwilling to forgive them and immediately became worried. He decided to throw caution to the wind and roared at the top of his lungs, Ji Tianxing, stop. As long as you spare our lives, I'm willing to tell you a huge secret. Really? Only a dozen people know this secret. You'll definitely be interested. Ji Tianxing was indeed interested. The divine light in his left hand disappeared. Oh, what secret? When Marshal Qingyang saw the opportunity, he quickly explained, this secret is related to the great emperor of our clan and the gods of the upper realm. However, I can only tell you alone. Ji Tianxing chuckled and said, all right. If that's the case, I'll spare your life for now. As for the others. As he spoke, he waved his left hand and shot out dozens of dazzling golden lights. Whoosh 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 whoosh. Dozens of golden sword lights cut through the sky and instantly pierced the Heaven Punishers beside Marshal Riyang. Bang bang bang. With a series of muffled explosions, the bodies of the 6 captains and more than 60 soldiers of the Heavenly Expedition exploded, their bodies smashed into pieces. In the sky, only Ji Tianxing, the other 2 and Marshal Riyang were left. Marshal Riyang trembled as he witnessed the Heaven Punishers being killed in seconds. He was furious. However, his rationality soon overcame his anger. He tried his best to remain calm and looked coldly at Ji Tianxing. He gritted his teeth and said, Ji Tianxing, you're so vicious. Ji Tianxing sneered disapprovingly, ha. If you continue to spout nonsense, you'll be the next one to die. Marshal Riyang's expression froze and he quickly shut his mouth. Ji Tianxing retracted his left hand and led Yun Yao and Ji Ku across the sky. They flew to Marshal Riyang and stood still. Now you should tell us the secret. Marshal Riyang looked at Yun Yao and Ji Ku. He hesitated for a moment before saying in a low voice, this is the top secret of my clan. Only the Emperor, Empress, Prince, Left and Right Protectors, Imperial Tutor and the 5 Marshals know about it. Nobody else knows about it. I didn't know about it before. After Marshal Zhendong died and I took over his position, I found out about this secret. Ji Tianxing and the other 2 did not reply. They listened attentively. Marshal Riyang said with a serious expression, on the surface, the upper realms deities value our clan. They used God's grace, divine light and other means to help our clan develop and strengthen. However, in reality, our clan is just a pawn in the hands of the upper realms deities. We're lackeys that they've carefully cultivated. Our clan conquering the stars, invading the major galaxies, and dominating the trichiliocosm were all ordered by the upper realms deities. Ji Tianxing frowned and asked, why would the upper realms deities do this? The trichiliocosm is a mortal world after all. The deities don't care about it at all. I don't know the specific reason either. Marshal Riyang shook his head and said in a low voice, I only know that this is the plan of the upper realms deities. Seems to be related to an ancient legend. What ancient legend? Yun Yao asked with a serious expression. Marshal Riyang shook his head blankly, indicating that he did not know. Ji Tianxing nodded and said, go on. Marshal Riyang continued, other than ordering our clan to dominate the trichiliocosm, the upper realms deities also gave an oracle to the great emperor. After that, the great emperor gave a secret order to all the marshals to search for a divine map in each of the major galaxies. This mission is very confidential and has always been carried out in secret. Divine map. Ji Tianxing narrowed his eyes. A glint flashed in his eyes and he asked in a low voice, "What divine map? Formation map? Divine weapon map or treasure map?" Marshal Riyang smiled bitterly and said, "I don't know either. Even the great emperor can't clearly describe what the divine map looks like or what its characteristics are. We only know that any divine map that is beyond the level of a true god must be collected and handed over to the great emperor for inspection." Chapter 2690. Ji Tianxing was very interested in the divine map. Many thoughts flashed through his mind. His heart was filled with questions and he wanted to find out the truth. Unfortunately, Marshal Riyang knew very little about this. Even the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher did not know what the divine map was that the upper realm deities wanted. Ji Tianxing was somewhat unwilling to give up. He tried to interrogate Marshal Huiyang in a roundabout way, but failed to get any useful information. After revealing these secrets, Marshal Riyang was like a deflated balloon. He was dispirited. "Ji Tianxing, I've told you all the information and secrets I know. You should also fulfill your promise and let me live." Marshal Riyang looked up at Ji Tianxing and said expressionlessly. However, before he could finish, Ji Tianxing interrupted him. "The top secret you mentioned is not only vague and ambiguous, but it's also hard to tell if it's true or false. I'll have to verify that you're telling the truth before I consider sparing your life." Marshal Riyang frowned and asked cautiously, "How do I verify it?" "Search your soul, of course," Ji Tianxing said as he extended his right palm and released a mysterious black light that enveloped Marshal Riyang. "No." Marshal Riyang turned pale with fright. He roared with grief and anger, "Ji Tianxing, you untrustworthy bastard, you're despicable and shameless." As he cursed, he unleashed all his strength and tried to teleport away. However, his injuries were too severe. How could he escape from Ji Tianxing's grasp? In the next moment he was enveloped by the mysterious black light. An incomparably strong divine soul power invaded his body and tightly wrapped around his divine soul. Marshal Riyang's soul suffered a heavy blow. His consciousness blurred and he fainted. After that, Ji Tianxing forcibly seized his soul's memories, causing his soul to be injured and he remained unconscious. After 100 breaths of time, Ji Tianxing finished refining Marshal Riyang's memories and ended the spell casting. He slowly withdrew the mysterious black light and slapped the unconscious Marshal Riyang with his palm, killing him instantly. When facing the Heaven Punishers, there was no need to talk about morality or trust. Moreover, he had never promised Marshal Riyang that he would let Marshal Riyang live. When Yun Yao and Ji Ku saw that he had killed Marshal Riyang, they both asked about the situation. "Tianxing, is Marshal Riyang's secret true or false?" "Big brother Tianxing, have you already gotten the answer?" Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and answered, "I've already refined Marshal Riyang's memories, so I have a better understanding of the Heaven Punisher race." He wasn't lying. Everything he said was true. The Heaven Punishers were indeed the lackeys of the deities of the upper realm. They were ordered by the deities of the upper realm to invade all the major star zones in an attempt to dominate the 3,000 worlds. During this process, they were secretly searching for the whereabouts of the divine map. They collected many treasures that seemed to be the divine map and handed them to the Heaven Punisher for inspection. Yun Yao frowned and thought for a while, then asked, "The deities of the upper realm ordered the Heaven Punishers to invade the 3,000 worlds because of an ancient legend. What legend is it?" Ji Tianxing was silent for a moment, then said calmly, "Maybe it has something to do with the Five Elements world? After all, the Five Elements world is the most special star among the 3,000 worlds. It once coexisted with the heavenly realm and the dragon realm. It's an eternal main world." Ji Ku came to a sudden realization and quickly nodded. "That's right. Big brother Tianxing's analysis is right. It's very possible." Yun Yao nodded slightly. "It's indeed possible. Many years ago, the Heaven Punishers knew about the existence of the Dawn Stones and reported this to the deities of the upper realm. The deities of the upper realm were also very interested in the Dawn Stones and ordered the Heaven Punishers to do their best to steal them. If the deities of the upper realm let the Heaven Punishers dominate the 3,000 worlds in order to find the Five Elements world, then everything that happened before makes sense." Ji Tianxing and Ji Ku nodded in agreement. After a moment of silence, Jiku asked again, Big Brother Tianxing, you've refined Marshal Riyang's memories. Do you know what the divine map that the deities of the upper realm are looking for is? Ji Tianxing shook his head and explained, Marshal Riyang's position is lower, so he only knows a little. He doesn't know the details. The person who knows the most about this should be the Heaven Punisher. However, there's something you need to take note of. The deities of the upper realm can interfere with the heavenly Tao's rules and help the Heaven Punishers avoid the 9 heavenly tribulations. This means that the deities are at least at the peak of the God King stage. The divine map that they want is definitely a treasure above the God King stage. Coincidentally, I have a formation that surpasses the God King stage and is infinitely mysterious. Ji Tianxing was talking about the Heaven Punisher formation hidden under the chaotic fog in Kenshin's tomb. 1,000 years ago, Kenshin had obtained the Heaven Punisher formation after a near-death experience in some ancient ruins. This item was known as the ultimate mystery of the God realm and contained the secret of immortality. Therefore, countless God Kings went crazy for it and tried to steal it at all costs. Kenshin's death was definitely related to the Heaven Punisher formation. Jiku had participated in the Great War of the Gods and knew the reason why Kenshin was surrounded by so many God Kings. When she heard Ji Tianxing's words, she trembled and immediately understood what Ji Tianxing meant. Big Brother Tianxing, you mean the Heaven Punisher formation? It's very possible. Ji Tianxing nodded. Jiku's eyes widened and she said in disbelief, We've already died 1,000 years ago and the Heaven Punisher formation disappeared with us. Those bastards from the God realm are still thinking about the Heaven Punisher formation and won't give up until they find it? Jiku paused for a moment. She thought of something even more terrifying and said with a complicated expression, If the God realm deities from the upper realm are asking the Heaven Punisher tribe to find the Heaven Punisher formation, then that means the deities behind the Heaven Punisher tribe are the God Kings from back then. There are mortal enemies. Yun Yao's expression also changed and she said in a serious tone, I'm afraid that the current God realm is no longer the same. The ones in power are most likely the God Kings. Even though Tianxing has died 1,000 years ago, they haven't given up on searching for the Heaven Punisher formation. Looks like even if we ascend to the God realm we might not be safe. We'll definitely face greater danger. After the three of them analyzed the situation, the truth gradually surfaced. Ji Tianxing smiled and said in a playful tone, Fate is indeed a dead knot that can't be untied. Even though I've died 1,000 years ago and reincarnated, I still can't escape fate. In the end, I have to fight to the death with those bastards and settle my grudges. The Heaven Punisher tribe, the 5 elemental world, and the Heaven Punisher formation are the things that led me to the path of revenge. Whether we know it or not, whether we're willing or not, we can't escape fate's arrangement. Yun Yao also nodded and said, In the mortal world we have to fight to the death with the Heaven Punisher tribe. Even if we ascend to the God realm, we have to solve the mystery and take revenge on those God Kings. Jiku looked at the sky with a burning gaze and said in a determined tone, In this life, we definitely won't lose. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.